Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to call this Planning Commission meeting to order. Please let the record reflect that all five commissioners are present. And I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we start each meeting with oral communications. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the commission on items that are not on the agenda tonight. You'll be given 3 minutes. I believe we have one speaker tonight.
Yeah, we do have one speaker, and that's Helen Bourne.
Can I interrupt you quick? Your microphone's not working, so we can't record it. Can we take a second pause?
Oh,
Okay, now
is
it's
this better?
Now it's working. Thank you.
I'll start you over.
Okay, all right. Well, I would like to suggest home sharing. Homeowners who are interested would share with renters with the agreement that they would keep the rent no more than what the person could afford, like a third of their monthly income or however it's done. I know 2 owners in the San Diego area who do share, and they have said it really works. I mean, you have to, of course, discuss compatibility and all that, but there are benefits for both the owner and the renters. And plus, it's a better use of space rather than 1 or 2, 3 people just with a big empty house, you know, and extra space. And I thought, well, the city could track it if it would take a while to get going, but the city could keep track of how many, you know, added, rentals it would provide that were, you know, affordable. So it's a suggestion, and there are benefits to both. I mean, both these owners are very happy. They say it becomes like an extended community, so it's something to think about. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your suggestion. Tonight, I'd like also take a quick moment to read a statement of my own. As many people may be aware, there's been a lot of public discussion around the City Council's meeting on February 12th, and my name has come up in several of those discussions. So I'd like to provide this record to clear the air. Public comments at the February 12th, 2025 City Council hearing regarding my recusal and later participation in the Quail Meadows Planning Commission hearing have mischaracterized my actions, and I'd like to provide you with the true nature of my decisions. My architectural firm provides design services to nonprofit organizations that build and manage affordable housing projects. It came to my attention before that hearing that the developer had preliminary discussions with one of my clients about potentially managing the affordable component of the Quail Meadows project. I had no part in these discussions and only became aware of them while reading the staff report, though I came to understand later that there was only a slim chance my client would be involved. I chose to recuse myself to avoid any potential of a conflict of interest. The Planning Commission hearing was held without me, but was not completed that night, and the project was continued to a future date. When the project was eventually resubmitted, substantial changes had been made to the design, including the elimination of the standalone building for the affordable units. The units were now distributed equally throughout the project. This new approach does not fit the business model of my client, and they made it clear to me that they would not be involved in the project. I no longer had a potential conflict of interest, and I participated in the October 3rd, 2024 Planning Commission hearing. At the time of that hearing, I struggled with how to describe the nuance of my previous recusal without getting too far into the weeds. I was also preoccupied with managing a large crowd in a contentious project. Confident I had no conflict, I carried on with the hearing. In hindsight, I regret that I did not take a moment to explain my participation. I can see now how, in the absence of that information, the public is left to speculate and insinuate my motives. To be clear, contrary to speculation by some, I have no financial interest in that project. I do not know. I have never worked for that developer. Further, I have never talked to that developer outside of the Planning Commission hearing, and my actions have been solely in support of the city's housing goals as mandated by the housing element. And that's yeah. Thank you very much for that. We will move on to the next item. There were no other oral communications? Okay. On to changes of the agenda. I think there is a few changes.
I'd like to pull item 6B from the consent calendar.
Okay. Any other changes to the consent calendar?
I'd actually like to pull 6A just because I have some questions.
Okay, so we will pull both those items. That leaves no other items on the consent calendar, so we will skip that section and go straight to 6A. This project name is Dish 860 Regal Road, case number multi-006201-2023. And with that, I will ask for a staff presentation. Or Bob, you pulled the item. Is it? Do you need a staff presentation for that?
Yeah, yes, I would. This is my first time on a telco tower, so I just had some questions about some of the research that was provided.
Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Cristina Bustamante.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Cristina Bustamante. I will be presenting this project this evening. Give me just a moment while I prepare my slides here. Oh. There we go. That's perfect. Okay. Alrighty. So the subject parcel is located east of the 5 freeway on the west side of Regal Road between Requesa Street and Melba Road. Vehicular and pedestrian access to the project site is provided off of Regal Road. The project includes the following scope and permit types. A major use permit because it's a new wireless facility proposed within a residential zone. A design review permit for the exterior facade modifications associated with the wireless facilities, as well as installation of landscaping along the northwest and south perimeter of the existing building. And a coastal development permit because the project is located within the coastal zone. The project would establish a new wireless facility. The project will conceal the antennas inside matching towers located one on each westerly facing corner of the existing self-storage building, shown on this slide in yellow. So if you look here, this is the westerly side. So it's very, very small on this slide, but the towers are also quite small in relation to the whole facility. And then here in the red circle is ground-mounted equipment, which it will be concealed behind a block wall. Both of these elements have been designed to incorporate architecturally into the existing building. These elements are intended to match the existing colors and materials of the existing buildings. The project lies within the Scenic Visual Corridor Overlay Zone and has provided a camouflage installation, minimizing any visual impacts as seen through the I-5 corridor, and that's what you see here in the photo is the I-5. The installation will completely screen all associated equipment and antennas within the proposed towers and are behind a block wall for the ground-mounted equipment as demonstrated in this photo simulation. So this photo simulation here is pointing out this is one of the tower elements. This is the second tower element over by the flagpole. And then tucked behind here is going to be that block wall that will be finished with materials that will match the adjacent building. The landscaping will be restored with a variety of trees, shrubs, and ground cover planted around the perimeter to help buffer the view of the wireless facility as seen from Interstate 5. The city retained a third-party wireless consultant, telecom law firm PC, to review and assess the technical data of the proposed wireless facility. The consultant reviewed the radio frequency components of the application, including the coverage maps, the physical elements related to the transmission equipment, and the detailed radio frequency analysis prepared by EBI Consulting. Telecom law firm PC, through the analysis contained in the applicant's radio frequency emission study about power, antenna height, and other elements, confirmed that the proposed telecommunications facility is in compliance with the FCC requirements. The telecommunications facility has proposed will operate in full compliance with the standards for radio frequency emissions as adopted by the FCC, with adherence to conditions contained within the attached draft resolution of approval. And then these are some of the elevations of the project. So this is looking at the north side of the building. This bottom illustration here is looking at the south elevation, and here you can see where that block wall will be installed on the ground to conceal the ground-mounted equipment. And I would like to clarify, it looks like there's antennas that are here. You can see them, but these will be concealed within the building. They're just shown here so that you understand that that's where they're going to be located. But again, they're fully concealed and will not be visible from the freeway or from the public right-of-way. This is the east elevation of that particular project. So this is the side that's going to face Regal. So kind of a smaller element here. Again, the antenna is illustrated here just to show where it's going to be located, but it will not be visible. And then here on the west elevation, this is the side that's going to face the freeway. And so you'll see both towers. There's a chunk here of the building there. Whenever you see this symbol, that means that there's more in between. They've just shortened so that you can see both towers in the same page here. And then again, this is the ground-mounted equipment that will be concealed behind a block wall. And then this is just kind of colors and materials demonstrating that the applicant is intending to match the colors and materials of the existing site, such as the Spanish tile roofing, the stucco, and the colors being kind of a tan beige. This illustration here is showing you the towers that will be there. It's the inside look, if you will. So these are the antenna elements. There are 3 total. And this is a slide that's showing the ground-mounted equipment. So this is the equipment that will be inside of that enclosure. The enclosure does not have a roof. It's just a block wall, and it's finished with stucco. Alrighty. And then let me jump through here. The project has been determined to be exempt from environmental review pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, Guideline Section 15303A, for new construction or conversion of small structures. The proposed project as conditioned is consistent with the general plan, local coastal program, and applicable sections of the Encinitas Municipal Code. The findings can be made to support the approval of the project, and staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the major use permit, design review permit, and coastal development permit based upon the findings and conditions contained in the attached proposed resolution. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Bob, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. This is my first time around on one of these telco towers. Let's see, so they need a major use permit, a design review permit, and a coastal development permit, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Let's see. And in R11 zones, which allows for the storage, and the R11 zone also allows for wireless facilities in terms of the current EMC?
Got it. So you mentioned 2 different things. You
Okay.
mentioned storage and wireless?
Yes.
Which one are you asking
All right, so the
about?
first question is, R11 allows for the existing storage units in an R11 zone, or is that a non-conforming, legal non-conforming use?
Correct, yes. So the storage facility as it sits right now is a legal non-conforming use. So if today they would have gone through and said, hey, I want to propose it would not be allowed. However, because it was permitted a long time ago when it was under county jurisdiction, it remains. And so that's why it's legal non-conforming. It did have a permit. It was legally established at some point. And then you asked about the wireless facility part.
Correct. Under the current zoning, under R11, are wireless facilities allowed?
With a major use permit, yes.
Okay. So right now, they have to get a major use permit to put the towers in?
Correct.
Okay.
Could I piggyback on that for
Yeah,
one
please.
clarification? Will the action tonight, will the major use permit retroactively permit the storage facility? Is it in any way kind of reverse approving that one? Or
No.
just remains a non-conforming use?
Correct.
Thanks.
I didn't have a chance to scrub it, but EMC 9.7 is our wireless code section.
Yes.
Okay. And I think on page 75 of the staff report, it mentions that we have to follow the guidelines set by the FCC because it's federal, and so whatever the FCC allows, we kind of by default in our code have to allow it?
Yes.
Okay. And so do we adopt the federal guidelines as incorporated, or are they incorporated by reference? So on page 5, or I guess my question is on page 5, are the city telco standards the same as the FCC, or are our standards any different than theirs?
So how do I word this? We're essentially relying on the third-party consultant to look at the documents that have been provided by the wireless facility to say that they have demonstrated compliance with the FCC. The requirements of the FCC is not something that I myself would have looked at, and so that's part of why we would rely on that third-party consultant. So the FCC standards are not codified within our code, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But all the things around it, the towers and the landscaping, that's now going to be enhanced because right now it looks pretty bare along the freeway side. But all the textures and the roofing and all those things, those are all part of our city code.
Correct.
Okay, so we're making them, they want to put the antennas up. It's an R11 site. They need a major use permit. But if we were to apply, if they want one, we're saying, oh, you have to make sure that the textures and the format and the towers are hidden. Those are all in our code, and you feel like the plans mirror, or adhere to our EMC code.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Is there an aerial map that shows? Oh, in the staff reports, are you required to? Not too many people commented on the notice. In the staff report, is it common to put a map with like a circle radius from the site out 500 feet? That's just a general question, maybe not specific to this specific application.
That's included with the legal notice. And so the legal notice is something that gets attached to the staff report as an attachment. So in short, yes.
I didn't see site radius in the staff report. Maybe I missed it. And is there a conclusion to the telecom law firm report? Did they actually make a definitive statement that everything is copacetic?
Yeah, so going through the telecom, for the benefit of everybody else, telecom is the firm that the city is using as a third-party consultant to review.
Right.
They provided a report that said this is our analysis or the conclusions of it. In that report, there are several statements in which they generally are in consensus to where they say this is what the consultant for Dish Wireless has provided, and telecom is in concurrence with it. And so there's several sections in that report where they make statements like that. Does that help?
Yeah. Let me go to page 51 here for a second. I had another
I have a
note.
question while Bob's
Yep.
looking at that.
Thank you.
So we talked about already the use of the materials and everything to match in order to get the major use permit. The landscaping that they're putting in, is that also required by the city in order to get the major use permit?
So the landscape is something that I required of them as part of their design review. The site itself had lapsed in its landscaping. It really should have been there all along. And so because they're coming in with a new application, this was an excellent opportunity to say, hey, you're currently out of conformance with your previous permit. You should renovate that and bring that back up to what it was permitted before. And so that's part of the landscaping. It also comes in as an element for us to say, hey, this is also speaking to our code in providing screening for the wireless facility. And so that's another reason why landscaping was important for this project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for making them, pulling that up and pulling up the landscaping. Could you turn to page 51 of 104 in the report?
Okay, give me a moment.
Yeah.
Ooh, my pages are not numbered the same. That's okay. What is it that
Let's
you'd
see.
like to know?
So on page 51 of 104 of the staff report, looking at, this is the executive summary of the, I go up a couple pages, hang on a second, of the EBI consulting report.
Mm-hmm.
On page 51, the sentence reads, the composite exposure level from all carriers on the site is 5,830.56% of the FCC's general public limit at the nearest walking surface to each antenna. At ground level, the composite exposure level from all carriers on this site is approximately 18.94% of the FCC's general public limit. So I don't understand that statement in that it's saying that it's 5,830% above the FCC's general limit. Is that the energy that's being put off from the device and it exceeds the FCC by over 5,000%?
Yeah, I apologize. I'll have to defer to the applicant if they're here or to a technical analysis because
Understand.
yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know.
I don't know either. Anybody here from the applicant?
No.
It could be different at the emitting location compared to the ground level public access location, because later it says 18.9% in the general public limit and so on. So depending on where you are vertically, I think the emission would vary.
Well, I think it was high enough that they actually required, I think either the FCC or the city code requires special signage to alert people coming near the facility that this is there. Is that correct?
Yes, so those are things that are required by the FCC. There's also, within the third-party analysis, there's recommendations that are included in there that say, hey, you need to follow the FCC guidelines for signage. And so those recommendations from that third-party consultant have been included as special conditions of approval on this project so that they know when they follow that.
Also on page 55 of 104, bless you, the sentence on section 5.0, summary and conclusions of the EBI report. As presented in the sections above, based on FCC criteria, the worst case emitted power density may exceed the FCC's general public limit within approximately 47 feet of the dish network antennas at the main roof level, to Susan's point. Modeling also indicates the worst case emitted power density may exceed the FCC's occupational limit within approximately 20 feet of the proposed area at the main roof level. Does that a concern to the consultant at all that we're exceeding the FCC criteria for the worst case power
Yeah. So within the third-party consultant memo, the recommendation of that, and I believe it was intended to be the remedy of that, is that if there are folks within the area that are coming to perform service, say on the flagpole that's nearest to one of the towers, that the station should be powered down to be able to have somebody go in there, service without having to be exposed, and then they can go away and the station can power back up. So there's a condition of approval that has been included in the project for that.
What is the distance between the tower and the power and the adjacent, I think it's a congregate fair facility? Is there a concern at all? Does anybody have any concerns that the distance, based on what they described here, is too close to residents? It's one thing to be facing the freeway, but what about the adjacent facility?
No, so the adjacent facility is about 100 feet away if you were to measure from parcel lines. But no, it didn't come up as a concern.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Christina. Is the applicant here? No? Okay. So I will close the public comment or portion and open it up to deliberation. I share your concerns, Bob. This doesn't sound like a great thing. It does sound very technical, and I don't know. I'm a little nervous about some signs that just say don't approach this flagpole or like this area, and the idea that we'd shut off the wireless tower if someone wanted to go clean the flagpole.
I agree, and because it's technical and it's because it's my first time seeing some of these items, I would have really appreciated the applicant coming to share their thoughts on something like this, so we could have asked them some technical questions just from an education standpoint.
Right. So you're aware, and so the public is aware, we as the city lack the authority to add any regulations beyond which the FCC allows. So if they're in compliance with FCC requirements, which we've heard that they are, we cannot go over and above that. So we can't take into account whether we're concerned about the health effects of RF emissions.
I do see that they have a safety plan attached, and if it complies with FCC, I would assume, I guess, for lack of a better word, that it does keep us safe, and anyone in the vicinity who works there that have to shut down transmission if they're in the zone too close.
Correct. Just to kind of put some parameters on, does anybody have any concerns about the design review aspect of this? The look of the tower, the height, the placement of the tower?
No, I do not.
So as it relates to the Encinitas Municipal Code, I think I'm sensing that there's just generally agreement that it's an acceptable major use permit, design review permit, coastal development permit, and the questions are centering around a health concern expressed as an FCC regulation.
Yes, that would
Yeah.
be consistent with my concerns, yeah.
Okay. I would tend to maybe agree with Commissioner Sherrod and the council that maybe that's outside of the purview that I don't know how we'd begin to unwind that, not knowing the FCC regulations myself.
I guess, I mean, it's following it, and our consultant says that it appears to be, but I guess the fact that the applicant is not here tends to, I feel, disrespectful to the commission, that they probably should come and be technically, if they're technically savvy and I am not, then I would appreciate their knowledge to be shared with the constituents and the city. But they're not here tonight.
Yeah. We did hire a consultant who is knowledgeable in this field, right? And they wrote a report saying that this fell within the accepted practices, I suppose, of these facilities.
Yes, that is true.
I think unless we were ready to deny it on one of the city merits, I don't know how we would continue it or deny it.
The point of the city hiring a consultant is it Colin Montz? Is that the name of the consultant? Anyway, I see he signed off here that he's an employee of Enviro Business, Inc., and provides RF EME safety and compliance services to the wireless communications industry. So I'm guessing, from what I'm seeing here, that he reviewed everything thoroughly. And I don't think the city would be paying a consultant if someone on city staff had this kind of certification that he has. So as long as all of the information from the application is accurate, he's reviewed that and determined it is okay and safe. I'm okay with what we're seeing, and the fact that the city hires a consultant is commendable, and I think helps us to stay safe.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion, Susan?
So you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the project.
Thank you.
A second?
Okay. I'll call the vote. Okay, that passes 5-0. Okay, the next item on our agenda is item 6B. This is the Ernie's Deli and Wine Bar alcohol license, case number multi-007 424 2024. Okay. Yes, thank you. If there are people here to talk about the Kim variance, that item has been pulled from tonight's agenda, and so I can cut you loose right now if that's the item you're here for.
Right, so so the item would be continued to, when is the hearing, when would that hearing be continued to?
It's going to be continued,
Oh,
sorry about that, will be continued date certain to Planning Commission on March 6th.
Okay.
so can we get a motion to continue that item to March 6th?
I'll make a motion to continue it to March 6th.
I'll second.
Call the vote.
I'm sorry, who's second?
Okay, that passes 5-0, and that will be continued till the March 6th Planning Commission hearing. Okay, with that, we're going to move back to item 6B, Ernie's Deli and Wine Bar, alcohol license. Case number multi-007 424 2024. And do we have a staff presentation? Kaipo?
Yes, thank you. All right. Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, members of the public. My name is Kaipo Kanino, Assistant Planner. The item before you this evening is project number multi-007424-2024, the Ernie's Deli and Wine Bar Alcohol License Project. The subject property, outlined in red, is located within the general commercial zone of the new Encinitas community. The subject tenant suite is outlined in yellow and located at 114 North El Camino Real. The project site is located within an approximately 8.84 acre commercial center that was approved under the County of San Diego prior to the city's incorporation. Surrounding the commercial center are various commercial uses to the north, south, and east, with single-family residences to the west. The applicant requests approval of a minor use permit and associated coastal development permit for an ABC Type 41 license to serve beer and wine at the proposed restaurant. The minor use permit request is also for the approval of a site-specific parking study, which verified that a proposed 70 square foot outdoor dining area will not adversely impact the existing parking supply. No exterior modifications are proposed. Minor interior modifications are proposed and under review as part of a separate building permit application. The proposed dining area within the restaurant will total 527 square feet with 12 tables and 25 seats. The proposed bar area within the restaurant will total 63 square feet with 8 total seats, and the outdoor dining area will total 70 square feet with 4 tables and 8 seats. Indoor service and consumption of alcohol will be from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily, and no outdoor alcohol service is proposed. Non-amplified live music is proposed to occur within the restaurant occasionally on Fridays and Saturdays from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. with a max of 2 performers. And both the Sheriff's Department and City's Code Enforcement Division reviewed the minor use permit and CDP request and had no comments or concerns. With that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the draft resolution of approval based upon the findings in the staff report and approve the project. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead.
There's one question from your presentation. You said Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Did you mean Monday through Sunday?
Yes, excuse me, if I said Monday through Friday, I did mean Monday through Sunday, so daily.
Yes. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Can I understand a parking study was required? They haven't modified the exterior sidewalk, but they just put 2 top tables there?
Correct.
I was just curious if the applicant was here. Okay, thank you.
No further questions of the staff?
No.
Oh, Bob?
Page 47 of 57 mentions the Chick-fil-A expansion. So in the traffic study, I believe, it mentions the Chick-fil-A expansion. Is there anywhere in the staff report that it mentions the Chick-fil-A expansion?
It's not mentioned in the staff report. It's mentioned in the parking analysis. The Chick-fil-A expansion is currently under review. So for the parking analysis aspect of it, the same firm essentially that is doing the parking analysis for Chick-fil-A provided the parking analysis for this project. So in that analysis, their forecasting included the Chick-fil-A expansion as part of that review.
So I would have had to read all the way to page 47 to read the traffic study to know that Chick-fil-A was doing an expansion, which, in my opinion, probably should have been noticed somewhere in the staff report, so that if I'm reading the staff report, I would know that there's an expansion or proposed expansion in the shopping center. So looking at the applicant's application a la carte, it seems to be applicable. So if it's applicable to the expansion is happening, why wasn't it noticed, or is it not always noticed in the staff report?
I'll jump in on that point. So this particular project is for Ernie's Deli. The scope of work is for Ernie's Deli. The parking study was conducted to show the increase for the outdoor seating area. The Chick-fil-A is still in review. It's not an approved project. And so the fact that the applicant has included that in their parking study, they've gone over and beyond what they're required to do. They only needed to include in their study this particular scope of work.
It's not so much the applicant, it's more of a question of the staff report requirements. In a holistic shopping center like this, there's lots of ebb and flow. We're asking to approve Ernie's Deli, but just a few feet away, staff already knows that there's an expansion going on of an existing center or an existing tenant. So why wouldn't that have made the staff report up front? So when I'm looking holistically at approving the application, that something that's going on in the shopping center wouldn't be included.
Yeah, again, it's a matter of the scope of work for this particular permit. For all we know, I mean, heaven forbid, but that is not an approved project yet. And so it's not something that we would have burdened this particular applicant with that. And so we really focused the staff report and the findings on this particular permit. And so I understand what you're saying, and that, hey, the Chick-fil-A's got this thing going on, they've got it in process, but because it's not entirely permitted, it's not something that would have been folded into this staff report. I get what you're saying, but I also feel that if we were to say, hey, Ernie's Deli, we feel that maybe you need to do X, Y, and Z because of what's happening for Chick-fil-A, it seems a little unfair. The Chick-fil-A, because they're still in progress, they will need to do whatever they need to do in order to make that project work.
But what you're basically saying is the commission has to look at things à la carte, and I'm saying it's a shopping center. We have to look at things holistically, and everything that's ebbing and flowing in that shopping center will affect our decision with regards to the permitting for the deli. And so maybe it's just something I'll take up later in a work plan conversation, but that seems to be a holistic conversation about an approval of a project. Well, I guess that's deliberation, so, sorry.
Yes, save that.
So
Right.
there's no requirement right now under any city code to discuss a holistic application of a applicant's, Mr. Ernie's Deli, when there's something that the staff knows is going on across the street. So there's nothing in our code that requires you to do that.
Yeah, so how do I explain it? Because it's not an approved project, like we wouldn't have necessarily burdened Ernie's Deli with that, but they have gone ahead and included that within their analysis so that they can account for whatever is happening over there at Chick-fil-A. So it's almost like a courtesy to us that they went ahead and said, okay, well, we're going to look at how we are compatible with that, if we impact with that at all. And really they don't. They're a much smaller use than what Chick-fil-A is going to be doing. But I understand what you're saying, and
Thank you.
yeah.
I think, Bob, it might be a matter of Ernie's project got here first, and they're asking for their approval, and then Chick-fil-A will come next and ask for their approval. And their approval might, the ability for them to be approved might change based on the fact that Ernie's is putting in these extra 8 seats or not, depending on what Chick-fil-A brings forward in the future. So it might affect Chick-fil-A's ability to make the expansion that they want. But Ernie's is here today. Does that make sense?
Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you for those clarifications. Would the applicant like to address the commission?
Sure. Do I need to come up there?
Yes, you'll get 10 minutes if you'd like.
I want 10 minutes.
We don't want you to take it either if you don't want it.
I just want to say thanks for the consideration. My wife and I are members of the community and have been for 15 years and are very excited about the prospect of providing a nice, friendly, relaxing environment for people to come, our neighbors, our friends, and enjoy great food and have a nice, relaxing time.
Good.
That's it. Thank you.
You might stay there. Are there any questions of the applicant?
So I did a question. I pulled the item because I saw in the staff report that you were requesting 2 musicians. And my question was, do you feel tied to only having 2 musicians? I wanted to maybe give you an opportunity to discuss among the group here whether or not we would approve more than 2 musicians for any time that you have live. I mean, I'm thinking.
So, I mean, the overall idea is just to occasionally have some, an acoustic musician with a guitar there. On the application, they asked me for how many people, and I thought we probably wouldn't have more than 2. It's a small place, so I don't want to have a whole band in there, but,
Right.
it's up for discussion for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments on this?
No speakers for this
All right,
item.
thank you. I'll close the public comment portion and open it up to commissioner deliberations. Chris, you pulled it.
I
think
did.
we're-
I did pull it just really particularly for the musician aspect, because we've had other projects before us where they had a small number that they were asking for, and it could be based on, because of the size of the space available, but I was thinking we might consider 3 or 4, just in case they did have a singer and, a guitarist, a keyboardist, or whatever. I just thought 2 was pretty limiting, even understanding that they might not have musicians very often, and they're only asking for the ability to have them on Friday and Saturday nights, indoors only. So, I'd be open to your thoughts on that and whether you guys think it'd be okay to allow them to have more than 2 musicians.
And I don't find any issue with, raising that number. I don't think it would affect the particular location, the neighbors, or have any, negative outcome. I'd support that.
My gut agreed. I would support it too. I think 3 is probably appropriate given the size of the space. 4 seems to be a bit much, and the acoustic in a singer is a good point. I like 3, but kind of random for him, and it's a pain in the neck to come back and ask for 4.
Right.
So he doesn't have to use 4, but he has the option to use 4. Per Commissioner Whitaker, I don't have a problem if up to a certain number, because he'll be burdened by noise ordinances and timelines and things like that.
Okay.
I would support 3 as well.
I'd just like to add, when I initially looked at this and I saw that it required 622 parking spaces and that they only have 397, it would trigger some concern. However, I'm familiar with this area because I live in New Encinitas, and one of the largest retail in the shopping center at this location is Kohl's, and they don't stay open that late.
They're leaving.
So
Yeah.
I don't see the parking as being a problem, and I frequent this area, so I'm not too concerned, but I can see why other commissioners, looking at those numbers, it would put your antenna up, kind of, what's going on. But it seems to me that it will work.
Okay.
And I can say as to that too, I have been in that shopping center a lot of times, and it does seem like there is a lot of available parking at any time that I've ever been in that shopping center. And the traffic and everything is really just concentrated in that Chick-fil-A corner only. So I don't see a big concern with the parking, and especially with the additional 8 seats outside.
Okay, I would support a motion to approve the project with 3 musicians.
I would support that.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the project and amend the resolution to up to 3 musicians.
And I'll second that. Call the vote. Okay, that passes 5-0.
Can I take a picture of my wife?
Sure.
Yeah. Yay. Thank you. Are we closed to deliberation regarding the staff, or is that something I can bring up later? It's more of a macro issue, and maybe not specific to this. It just was triggered by this?
The parking issue and the Chick-fil-A?
No, is it parking?
Bob, how about we talk after the meeting about it?
Okay, our next item is item 8B. Case number policy 006321, 2023. Applicant is the City of Encinitas, and this is the mature tree ordinance. With that, I will turn it over to staff, Evan Jedinek, for a report.
Thank you, and good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Evan Jednak, Senior Planner, here tonight to present Item 8B, the Mature Tree Ordinance. This effort was initiated by the City Council in December 2021, when the Council directed staff to define what qualifies as a mature tree and to establish objective standards for preservation. After working with council members to determine the project direction, staff provided the City Council an update on the development of the ordinance in October 2022. In March 2023, staff conducted a community workshop for the public to learn about and provide feedback on the ordinance development. In June 2023, a joint study session between the Planning Commission and the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, or UFAC, was held, and discussion topics focused on defining what a mature tree is, mitigation and replacement strategies, and applicability of the ordinance. In August 2024, staff returned to the City Council to reconfirm their direction in consideration of the feedback received during outreach efforts. Once City Council direction was confirmed, staff worked with the City Arborist to finalize the ordinance being presented tonight. A public review and comment period was conducted from January 30th to February 12th, with interested parties receiving an email and link to the proposed ordinance. All public comments received during this period are included as attachment PC3 to the staff report. Additionally, staff will present the ordinance and solicit feedback from the UFAC next week on February 27th. While the general plan resource element and climate action plan reference mature trees, the term is not currently defined in any city document, so defining a mature tree is necessary. Staff proposes the definition shown here. Mature tree would mean any tree with an 11-inch or greater trunk diameter, native tree species with a 9-inch or greater trunk diameter, and native scrub oak species with a 4-inch or greater trunk diameter. Examples of native tree types include coast live oak, cottonwood, sycamore, willow, and Torrey pine trees. And the diameter is measured at a point 4.5 feet above the base of the tree, otherwise known as diameter at standard height. Certain trees are proposed to be exempt from the mature tree definition regardless of size, which would include city-defined invasive trees, all fruit trees, and monocot species, which includes palm trees. Heritage trees are subject to separate regulations and are therefore also exempt from this ordinance. A key consideration of the ordinance development was determining which properties or development scenarios are subject to the ordinance. The ordinance would apply to the following properties: all public property and rights of way, private property subject to new development, including any new subdivisions, multifamily developments, and commercial or mixed-use development, and also redevelopment of these private multifamily and commercial properties that would affect existing landscaped or undisturbed area. Certain properties and specific trees are proposed to be exempt from the ordinance. Single-family properties on single lots would be exempt, and this would include single-family properties with accessory dwelling units. All property located within a high or very high fire hazard severity zone would also be exempt. Additionally, all orchards, botanical gardens, nurseries, and other professional growing operations would be exempt. The ordinance utilizes the mitigation hierarchy shown here for situations when mature trees are proposed to be removed. The primary intent of the ordinance is to preserve mature trees, so the first strategy is always to preserve the tree unless it's not practical or feasible, and the ordinance requires preservation measures for construction activity in close proximity to mature trees. If preservation isn't feasible, the next option is to relocate the tree. Relocation must be done on-site and would require an arborist to verify the tree's survival after 3 years. If relocation is infeasible, the next option is to replace the tree. Replacement scenarios are discussed in more detail in the next slide. So I'll skip to finally, if replacing the tree is altogether infeasible, there is an option for the applicant to pay an in lieu fee. The fee would be based on the assessed tree valuation using the appraisal guide approved by the International Society of Arboriculture, and the fee would go towards funding the Encinitas Habitat Stewardship Program. In mitigation scenarios where replacement is required, the ordinance specifies a 3-to-1 ratio for on-site replacement, which decreases to 2-to-1 when replacing with a native species to incentivize their use. The ordinance specifies a 4-to-1 ratio for off-site replacement, and this decreases to 3-to-1 when using native species. Replacement trees must be subject to the ordinance, so no exempt species are allowed as replacements. It is specified that on-site replacement must be considered before off-site replacement. If off-site replacement is determined to be necessary, the ordinance specifies that nearby public rights-of-way first be considered, then nearby parks, then other nearby public properties. If no nearby replacement options are available, the next option is to consider public locations further from the subject site following the same hierarchy. Enforcement of the mature tree ordinance would be the responsibility of code enforcement staff in conjunction with the city arborist. Code enforcement would work with the arborist to determine if a mature tree was removed without prior authorization and if the regulations in the ordinance were followed. To reiterate, the ordinance would not be applicable to single-family properties or other exempt properties. Enforcement would be limited only to properties subject to the ordinance. In conclusion, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2503, recommending that the City Council approve and adopt the mature tree ordinance. After the UFAC meeting on February 27th, the ordinance will be introduced to the City Council on March 26th and will return to the Council for potential adoption at a later date. This concludes the staff presentation, and we're available for questions along with the City Arborist.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any immediate questions for the staff? I think we might be going back and forth a lot with them, and we might just open it up again unless you have an immediate question. Okay. Susan?
I do have a couple of questions. I'm wondering, since you have said here in the ordinance language, any native tree species, and then you list certain trees, but what about, for example, a California black walnut? It's not considered a native?
The natives are the species that are listed out there. So we have determined that list in conjunction with the city arborist. If there are suggested changes, we're welcome to hear those.
Okay, because I'm thinking the California Native Plant Society probably does have a more comprehensive list that might be broader. It might include redbud, California redbud, for instance, which I don't see, and some other things. So I'm wondering if it's easier, instead of listing all these different trees that you've listed, to refer to a list that already exists for native trees, so that we don't miss some trees.
I think that's a deliberation that we should discuss as a commission, if that's direction we'd want to give them for that.
Well, it's their wording.
Yes, but
So
we're not
I'm
to that-
asking
we're not to
why
that
they did
point.
it the way they did it.
Well, I think he answered
Yeah.
that he's, in consultation with their arborist, put together a list. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Since the city is the applicant here, is there any public comment on this item? I see
Yes.
some slips.
We do have one speaker, and that's Mark Wisniewski. Mark does have two time donations, one from Kathleen Billings and the other from David Billings. Thank you.
Dino, was that something you received?
I am not sure what you're speaking about.
I sent both the PowerPoint.
Oh, probably to IT?
Yes, as requested
Yeah.
in the information for the meeting.
Okay, let me check with them to see if they.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
It's up, thank you very much. One question, do I advance it, or do I need to tell somebody to advance it? Okay. I'll just point to you. Good evening. Chairman Dalton, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Mark Wisniewski. I'm here in support of this ordinance, but I have a few recommendations for your consideration. Next. Quercus agrifolia with 2 varieties. I've been a consulting arborist and in the industry since the early 70s. I never knew there were these 2 varieties. I think it's redundant and unnecessary. Next slide. Select tree is an industry standard, and it does not list the variety agrifolia, although it does list several other as synonyms. For simplification, I suggest Quercus agrifolia, coast live oak. Most people understand what that is. They don't understand the varietals. Next. I'd like to change the wording of this section just a little bit. Furthermore, if a tree meets one of the following criteria is verified by an International Society of Arboriculture ISA certified arborist, delete the second certified arborist. The tree can be removed. What it currently says, but is subject to replacement or payment of an in lieu fee. The tree is dead. How can I get rid of the... Can you pose my time, please?
Testing. Testing. Is it still echoing?
Testing. It's okay now? Testing 1, 2, 3. Resuming. There are 4 conditions there. The tree is dead. The condition of the tree poses a high or extreme safety risk. The tree is dying or is in poor health in an emergent situation where the tree proposes an imminent life and safety risk. I've done hundreds of appraisals, many after the Rice Canyon and Witch Fire, and I've also done work on multiple tree risk assessments for the San Diego Unified Port District and UC San Diego. I don't see any value in trees that are listed under these conditions. Next. The following information I will share with you are from the city's Urban Forest Management Program, Administrative Manual of Procedures, which has been in place for a number of years. Fenced enclosures shall be erected around trees to be protected, figure 2.2. I'll show that later. Also under the same section, tree fences shall be erected before demolition, grading, or construction begins and remain until final inspection of a project. Warning signs shall be prominently displayed on each protective fence. No storage of material, topsoil vehicles, or equipment shall be permitted within fenced areas throughout the entire duration of the construction project. And it has this recommended sign, which is in conflict with the sign on figure 2.2, which is to be a laminated sign placed every 50 feet. It also requires 5-inch thick layer of mulch. The reason I'm pointing these out This is because I've got some examples later on to show. Okay. Under tree pruning and removal, construction or contractor personnel shall not attempt pruning. Only personnel approved by the city arborist can perform pruning operations. The bold, italicized, and underlining is not mine, it's from the original document. Root severance. No roots greater than 1 inch in diameter shall be cut without approval of either the city arborist or department directors. These roots shall be covered in wood chips and shall always be maintained above permanent wilt point. Roots 1 inch and larger in diameter shall not be cut without the approval of the city arborist. All pruning shall be performed by or under the direct supervision of an ISA certified arborist as approved by the city arborist. Next. This is new, taken from the mature tree ordinance, and it's a very desirable addition because we currently don't have language like this. Look at number 2, the Director of Development Services, any code enforcement officer, the building official, or their designees shall be authorized to issue stop work orders, notices of violation, and citations under this section. I took these photos yesterday afternoon late. The mature Torrey pines in the photos we'll be looking at were planted by the community volunteers on January 4th, 1992, a project known as 101 for 101. Before the start of Streetscape, 33 trees still existed. And important to note, regarding Climate Action Plan, it takes a planted street tree approximately 33 years to become carbon neutral. Go back, please. So this is a eucalyptus tree. No protective tree fencing. It's got steel fencing leaning up against the tree. And on the opposite side of the tree is parked a excavator, which when the boom is raised, has the potential of hitting the tree. The fencing you see is the construction fencing in the background, not protective tree fencing. That's this photo here. Next photo. So the reason that we have protective tree fencing is to prevent this from happening. Storing materials, putting in porta potties, people having their lunch there and leaving trash behind, meanwhile compacting the root system underneath the tree that's supposed to be protected. Next. Guardrail is not a tree protective fencing. And if you have driven along 101, you will not see one sign that says this is a protected zone, do not enter. Not one sign. Another large excavator parked under one of our 33-year-old Torrey pines. The branches are nearly touching the boom of the excavator. They had to, there, next. They had to cut several branches to allow for a deep excavation. However, these were not properly cut. These do not appear to have been cut by a certified arborist or tree care contractor. This appears to be contractor self-action because you don't mid-stem cut a Torrey pine tree in the middle of the branch because it will die back. The proper pruning is to remove the branch entirely back to its point of origin. Next. And a tree care contractor would not leave the prunings in an open trench to be buried by somebody else. Oh, by the way, that trench has been open for weeks. It's supposed to be covered. It's not supposed to be left exposed. And there's supposed to be 5 inches of mulch around all these trees in the median. That's not there. Next. This one. This is very clever. You can see how the curb is bent out there a little bit to protect that one root and allow it to get larger in the future. On top of the root, you can see a dark area where sap is oozing out because manual excavation was performed rather than pneumatic, which wouldn't have damaged the roots. Other roots towards the top have been cut and left exposed for weeks. So these photos clearly demonstrate nonconformance of current urban forest management program administrative manual procedure requirements. Over years, as serving as consulting arborist to Del Mar, many of my recommendations were included in the policy manual, including monthly inspection and reports to assure compliance and report any damages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I ask you a question, sir? I'm kind of.
You certainly may.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep track of the item, or the items that you identified, and just to pare it back, you wanted to modify the native list, the native tree list to include just live oak, coastal live oak instead of a duplicate.
Just Quercus agrifolia, coast
Okay.
live oak.
Remove replacement. You're advocating that with a certified arborist, you could remove a tree and not replace the tree or pay the in lieu fee.
Under those four circumstances,
Yes.
because those are the only ones directly listed that call for an in lieu fee, and I think that's an error.
Okay. I'm not sure I've tracked what you were talking about, the fence protection. Is that not in the are you suggesting new language, or what is it that you're proposing for that?
It's already in the language of the Administrative Manual of Procedures, and has been for years. It just hasn't been followed by the city.
Okay.
There have been numerous parks, Moonlight Beach, storm water drain, water line system in downtown, and in the community park where no tree protection was performed or is performed improperly, and equipment was stored next to trees.
I think that's what I'm trying to parse, is that some of your concern is the way the city is operating currently and not protecting. And I'm trying to understand what is in the mature tree ordinance that you disagree with, or, so the
I
fencing.
don't. I would just like to see that enforcement is enforced, including on current projects.
Okay, I understand that. Pruning, when you say not by a contractor, you're saying not by the, say, building contractor, but you could hire a tree, a tree trimmer, right? That would be a contractor of sorts.
There is a provision that the city arborist would approve that contractor to do the work.
Okay.
And in some cases, the city arborist may even supervise the work
Okay.
to make sure it's done properly and it's followed national pruning standards.
Okay. And you're asking that no roots greater than 1 inch be cut. And is that lacking in the mature tree ordinance now?
I'm not saying that roots over 1 inch can't be cut. What would be good to know is all those roots that are cut along Highway 101 on both sides of the median should be noted, their size, their depth, their quantity, and their location for use of future arborists if they're evaluating potential dieback and decline of the trees in order to prevent a failure.
Okay. And finally, the enforcement, the stop work order can come from the Director of Community Services, the code enforcement. Did you have any disagreement with that list of people?
I think it's a great list.
Okay. When you highlighted it in green, was that language that you were adding, or you were just
No,
calling our attention
that's
to
just,
that?
You can't read everything. I barely got through here in 9 minutes.
Okay.
And so I wanted to make it simple for you.
Mm-hmm.
You can review it at your leisure, I'm sure, and read all of the wording. I just tried to simplify it
No,
for
and I
time
do, I
limits.
do appreciate you coming today to express these. I guess if we were to take no other action on this last item about the code enforcement, you'd be happy with the way it's written.
For the enforcement, for the ordinance?
Yeah.
I'd be satisfied with that, yes.
Okay,
I'd like to see it in place now,
okay. I
or at least
understand that.
addressing the problems that are out there now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming back up. Is there any other questions? Okay.
Thank you for asking for clarification. I appreciate that.
Sure. No other comments?
No other speakers.
Okay. I'll close the public comment portion and open it up to commissioner deliberation. Well, is there any organization that we want to try to address here? Sometimes
Well-
we've gone section by section, or does anybody want to suggest some overall concerns or other way of approaching this?
Well, just in general, I have a few general overarching
Okay.
sort of comments. And then maybe we can do what you're saying and drill down. Number one, it's taking an inordinately long time to pass a tree ordinance for mature trees to protect them. And every day that we delay is a day another tree could be cut. And so I think we want to be a little bit expedient. Maybe this ordinance isn't perfect, and maybe it will be modified further subsequently. But I do think it's taken an inordinate amount of time to get it into our code. The second thing that's sort of a big area is it's really hard to specify, each tree that way when there are quite a few species of California natives. And I think it's better to use a list from an organization like California Native Plant, or San Diego County has listed, rather than to just put a list here. However, I do like that they are showing a reduced radius from 11 inches for natives. I'm not saying I think it's the right radius, but I'm glad that they're actually putting some attention on that. And I think I'll stop.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
I felt like at the offset, it was a little bit confusing to me who the target was. And I thought that could have been fleshed out a little bit better. It does state later in the document that this isn't for private individual parcels, but it's more for larger projects. And I felt like that definition could have been fleshed out a little bit earlier. Even in the intent and purpose at the beginning, it states the private development projects. And I think that's just confusing who that is targeting.
Okay. I'm just going to compile a list of areas of concern, and we can come back to each area then and discuss them if we could. So Bob,
I would like to discuss, there's a lot of comments that came in from commercial property owners, almost 40 pages. So a lot of them were concerned that this was overly burdened to them. So I'd like to kind of review some of their comments. Specifically, I'd like to understand if, why a palm tree or eucalyptus are exempt, and maybe I read that wrong, so I'd like to talk to the arborist about that. I also want to know if we pass the ordinance and a new development comes down, and I'll go retroactively to a project that we approved. The Greek Church on Manchester tore down a very large, mature Torrey pine tree. Would the housing density bonus law exempt, would they be able to get a waiver? So this is technically maybe for Scott. Would they be able to waive the mature tree ordinance as part of their waiver? So especially on a housing density bonus law. But then Alternatively, there was a project that came before us in Encinitas called the Sanctuary that wasn't using housing density bonus law, but I think we're removing trees. So is that to Brett's question, is that what we're really targeting, or new developments versus existing developments?
So I can answer your first question. So you are correct that this ordinance does not apply to, say, for example, palm trees. In other words, you can cut down a palm tree. That
Without
this
having-
ordinance
okay.
would not regulate you cutting down a palm tree. It's easier to cut down a palm tree than to
Right.
cut down a
Torrey pine.
Torrey pine.
Right, so the Torrey pine is protected, but the palm tree is not protected. Okay, thank you. Something else, I missed that. But-
So I think that answers your first question. The second
does.
question is, what is the impact as far as density bonus law? So yes, if something is able to obtain a density bonus, then it would be able to exempt itself from city regulations. So if somebody, for example, so because we have an inclusionary housing requirement in our code, most projects will end up being, most housing development projects will end up being subject, I should say, if there's a certain number of units, if they hit the unit threshold,
Right,
then they could exempt themselves. So if it's a small project, say, for example, 3 housing units,
right.
then that would not qualify for a density bonus.
So
If
how-
it- For
so-
like if it's like a triplex, right? Because that's not a single, nobody's saying I'm saying anything wrong, so I'll just continue.
Well, retroactively to the Sanctuary, that was 7 houses, 1 affordable, so it didn't hit housing density bonus law, but it was a planned development project, and I got pretty worked up over taking down some trees that I wanted to be replaced with mature trees. They were specifically eucalyptus trees, which is fine that they're taking them down because they're fire hazards, but would the mature tree ordinance would have affected what they would have been required to replace in that instance? That is a new development. It's not a housing density bonus law.
Yes, correct. That would have been subject to the ordinance.
Thank you.
Depending on what type of eucalyptus it was, because a few eucalyptus are on the San Diego County invasive species list, and they would not be protected under the ordinance because they're considered invasive.
Right, I was hoping to take down the invasive and replace them with a sycamore or one that was on our list. That was the whole conversation. They basically said, I don't have to do that because we didn't have a mature tree ordinance. I'm seeing the arborist nod.
Well, if it's on the San Diego invasive species list, it's exempt from the ordinance. It would not be protected under the ordinance.
Right, would not be protected, but would the ordinance require, if they took them down because they are invasive, yay, that's good, and because they're a fire hazard, yay, they're taking them out, is the mature tree ordinance requiring them to put in one of our required trees?
Not if they're one of the 2 eucalyptus species on the invasive species list.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll bring up the list here so you can see red gum or river red gum as well as blue gum.
Right.
Those are the 2 types of eucalyptus that are considered invasive, and so therefore they would not be subject to the ordinance. If it were any other type of eucalyptus, that would be subject to the ordinance and replacement.
Okay. Rights of way is another question I have. There are invasive species in public rights of way. And in my neighborhood, when the past, those trees have fallen down and or been damaged, the city has come back to them and said, you have to replace it with another red gum eucalyptus. And the owner who's responsible for replacing the tree is like, I don't want to put one of those in.
That sounds like that might be changing if this ordinance.
Yeah,
gonna do
that was a question that.
I can chime
I
in
don't
on
want
that
to burden
one.
everybody with the back and forth right now. You were just trying to make a list, and I was
Sure.
just trying to give you, so rights of way, sorry.
No, when it comes, if there's invasive plants that, Chris Coltrane, city arborist. When there's invasive plants that are removed within the city right away, we will not require replacement with the same species. There's been instances where Canara and date palms, we've requested to be removed, or people have even asked to relocate them. We won't because they're on the invasive city list, and so technically we're not allowed to replant those species. So within the public right away, we will not replant anything that's on the native species, the invasive species list.
And that's because of the ordinance, right? right?
That is because there's an existing invasive plant ordinance within the city, which references this list, which is the county list. So that's what we base our recommendations off of. We cannot plant anything on that list within the city right away. So if we cut down a tree, say it's a blue gum, we're not going to plant a blue gum back in that spot because it's against the current city ordinance as it pertains to invasive plants.
Seem to be some confusion along the property owners on Fortuna Ranch Road. So
There's a little bit. Yeah, but they should not be. We never asked
The
them
city
to.
told the neighbors that they had to replace that tree with that tree, which is why they replaced it with another invasive tree. So maybe that's an old one, but that's an example of in the right of way. And how does this mature tree ordinance affect the city itself? For instance, on 2nd Avenue, there's a lot of ficus trees that have ripped up the sidewalks. And is this going to be applicable to the city? Are they going to require to, if they were to take them out, to replace them with something more? Because those are invasive species. They're invasive with roots. And how will the city apply it to themselves?
So the ordinance does state that it does apply to city.
Okay.
trees.
That answers that.
Just a general question, though. This ordinance doesn't require the city or a property owner to go in, if they're not making any changes to the property, to go in and just remove invasive trees. Invasive trees can remain unless there's going to be a redevelopment of the project or a redevelopment of the street or something like that. Is that right?
Or
Yes,
they're dead.
yes,
or
that's
they're-
correct.
Thank you.
But
Or they're dangerous.
right. Right, those 4 bullets. Yeah.
No, I want to clarify that, though. It says that if the tree is being removed, you've got to replace, it doesn't only apply if you're applying for a building permit, right? I mean, it's saying homeowners or property owners, if we're talking about trees that are not invasive, right? If it was a Torrey pine tree out on your property and it got sick and died, you're required to replace it with 3? Or,
Not if it's a single residence.
well,
No,
what
if it's not related to development, then if it's a single private property owner that has a tree that's dead on his property, a mature tree that they want to remove, my understanding is there's no permit that's required. This is aimed primarily at development. So if you have one in your backyard that you want to remove, you're not doing development, it is not considered a protected tree.
What about a property owner, Melba? I think we did, a lot of these redevelopment projects are on what you would consider single, I mean, maybe it was a commercial lot, right? If it's an old greenhouse site and there's 3 Torrey pines on it, and that developer, there was some language in here that said if it had been removed within 2 years prior to a development application, this would apply?
Just to clarify, so multifamily is subject to the ordinance. And then to your point, yes, there is something that says if someone, the intent of the ordinance was so that if someone would go in and tear down all the mature trees and say, look, I have nothing on site, and then they submit an application, we would look at historic photographs in the code. The mature tree ordinance says if it was taken down within 2 years, then you would be subject to the replacement requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, so the question on Melba, I always like using examples because that's what kind of came to us all the time. So on the Melba site, I think it's Torrey Crest or whatever it was called, there was multiple houses, single-family dwelling units, and there were 30 of them. Is that a multi-family project?
Yes.
And that because they're using the definition that's in the city code for multi-family development.
Because they're creating those lots. Those were not individual lots before the application. They created
Through the
30 new
subdivision.
subdivision
So
lots.
La Costa, another example would have been La Costa 48 would have been, and then the one that we dealt with up on, wasn't Saxony, the Bluff site that we just approved. Again, new houses, new development, single-family homes, but multiple homes on one application. Okay.
Correct.
Yes, it's specified that subdivisions are
Subdivision.
applicable.
Subdivisions, okay.
It also addresses fire zones, and I found that to be like a little bit nebulous. Like, Are those clearly defined zones within our area?
Yes, yeah, CAL FIRE maintains lists of high and very high fire hazard severity zones. They're updated throughout time, and so those are clearly defined.
Okay, there was a project that came before us called on Piraeus. Multi-family, by definition, subdivision, in a very high fire zone area. It was approved by city council, so we can talk about it, right? So let's just, were there any, that's already been approved. We passed the ordinance today, or the city council passes the ordinance in a couple weeks. Your point earlier, 2-year look back. So if they went over and like dug a tree out, we would have a 2-year look back on projects that are already approved that may not be in the resolution of the approval, but yet it's in a very high fire danger area, which Piraeus is. It is a multifamily development site.
But they're not applying for an application. I don't think you could retroactively go back to a project that's already been approved.
Right.
And potentially even built. You know, I don't, well, that one's not, but it doesn't,
Can we?
it doesn't go back that way. If it was vacant land now with trees on it.
And it
this
came
was
before us.
And they go cut the trees and
Right.
within 2 years of applying, then this ordinance would apply to them.
And so we can't pass, so nothing that we're doing, council, is retroactive in any way.
Correct.
Okay?
Well, it is on vacant land
On vacant land, right.
in some way, right?
Does-
Okay.
Was there anything, I'm sorry.
Nope, go ahead, Bob.
Size, we've also been approving projects and requiring certain size boxes of the tree. In other words, basically, a bigger box is a more mature tree, by, I guess, assumption. Should we be looking at making it the size of the trunk in terms of, if we're defining a mature tree here as 11 inches, 9 inches, and 4 inches, is there anything in this ordinance that would affect an application as we look at what trees and their tree palette and the landscape palette that defines putting in where there is no tree, number one, what kind of tree or size tree, and then rather than defining it by the box size, maybe define it by the trunk size, and then number two, if that's no tree is there, but now they have to put in trees as part of our tree ordinance, we can dictate the size of the tree. And again, we've been doing box sizes rather than trunk sizes. That's the question.
Okay. So,
We can talk about it later, but I think when you say trunk size, do you mean the trunk size of the tree that they're actually putting in, or what it's going to grow to? Because that would be the mature
At the time
tree.
he puts it in, I think.
Time you put it
At the
in?
time you put it in, because I think if you, based on the ordinance, what defines a mature tree is size. So I guess the question right now, we're looking at just, you have to put in a 36-gallon box tree, 36-gallon box tree. Well, it might have the trunk size of that, and it's going to take 33 years to grow. So I was wondering if anywhere in the ordinance, we're talking about brand-new developments, is this the place where we define that, or is it in the code and it comes back to our work plan under our code section?
Go ahead.
So the ordinance does specify that all replacement trees shall be of a size as determined by an ISA certified arborist and/or as specified in the UFMP manual, section 420. Section 420 of the manual specifies that each tree removed requires at a minimum one 15-gallon tree, or as directed by the city arborist.
So it's a gallon size box, not the size of the tree in the box, right?
Yes.
And that's only for replacements. What about a new tree? So the ordinance, the building code, I believe, says if you are going to build a development, you have to put in X number of trees. That's defined by the box size. Also, question.
For development projects, we tend to use a box size requirement, and some specific plans have different criteria, but in general, yes. For those types of developments, we tend to want larger sizes when they're implemented or when they're built, but this is different. We're referring back to the urban forest management plan, and we would look at the 15-gallon or as approved or recommended by the city arborist.
So we would then have to ask for, if I felt the box was too small and the developer is putting a bunch of twigs out that are going to take 33 years to build, where then do we make a suggestion? Is the suggestion made in changing the ordinance, which would, not the mature tree ordinance, maybe that's a city code conversation, and of course, that's a different path.
I would hesitate to get into that detail in this ordinance, only in that for my entire professional life, everybody's referred to box size and gallon size of the container of the tree. And we're going to add in another measure that may not.
Well, I want mature trees. I don't want a bunch of sticks, and that's just going to take
Well, I mean, that's
25 years to grow.
Yeah, that's, I guess, part of the reason you're multiplying them by 3 or 4 as the replacement.
And that brings up the other question of why is, and I think one of the correspondents asked, why is there only a 3-to-1 for native and a 4-to-1 for non? Should it be more natives to?
No, they're trying to encourage you to use the natives instead of going to non-natives.
Well,
right?
wouldn't they? So by doing less natives? I
Yeah.
think it was 3-to-1 versus 4-to-1. Could you explain?
Yeah,
it's
it's to incentivize using natives as replacement. So if you choose to use natives, you only have to do 3 as opposed to 4 if you were to choose non-natives.
But shouldn't we be encouraging natives or requiring natives versus non-natives? So shouldn't we be swapping that and saying 4 non-natives? Or you're saying, oh, he can get away with just putting 3 in, so they're going to do the least amount. And it seems like we're compromising the ability to put native trees in a drought environment, and we're going to put the wrong tree in.
Bob, what would your priority be, to have more trees or to have native trees?
I think long-term, I think it'd be to put in the native trees, because for me, it saves water, and it is more consistent with the fauna that survive in our communities. So to me, it would be, I don't know if having someone put 3 in is encouraging them to put them in. I think we just say you got to put in 4, just like you would put in 4 other trees. Why discount the natives? Why penalize them for not putting in the right amount of trees? So that was my thought.
Well,
why-
another point with you guys are talking about box size and diameters of trunk. In some ordinances in some cities, they may say a smaller trunk diameter, and then the replacements have to add up to that diameter. So for example, if we're removing a 9-inch, we'd put in 3 3-inch, and then 3 times 3 is 9. And so we've come up to the math of a 9-inch. So there are different ways that different cities word size and replacement. So but I agree native is desirable more than just any tree. And it's because when I go in my backyard, when I first moved into this place that I live in, there were very little native plants. And the city gave away some trees. A guy came and knocked on my door, and I'm in the middle of a busy day. I was still working. Anyway, he's like, would you like some trees? And I guess I had filled something out online saying that I was receptive. And so he put in some trees. Now I have these yellow blossoms that are covered with bees. And it's like, wow. In fact, I had so many bees that I had a hive in the attic that had to be taken out. But anyway, that was my own fault for not screening my attic. But anyways, the difference between those non-native things and native is like night and day in terms of our pollinators and the wildlife that we have in our area. So I do think we should prioritize replacement with native trees whenever it's feasible.
Okay. I agree with the way it's written, saying I think you are penalized if you do non-native because you have to add an extra tree. And I think it does act as an incentive if you want someone to put in native trees. They can put in fewer of them, and we know that most people are looking at the cost of installing and the space requirement for putting these in there, and they're more likely to go put 3 trees in then, and if they were equal, then you have a 50-50 shot about whether they choose a native or a non-native thing. So I think the way it's written now, if the idea is to prioritize or encourage native trees to go in, I think it reflects that in the ordinance as it's written.
You could just make it 4. I mean, Mr. Cousins.
But then why not just go put in not a non-native? If I'm going to do 4 no matter what, then based on my personal choice, I'll go put in a non-native if I choose, right? So we didn't get anything further on the natives.
Well, Mr. Cousins, who submitted a letter, basically says, and I agree with him, public safety is an element of the general plan. So we have to prepare for natural disasters, wildfires. Well, natives don't burn. I could probably ask the arborist, but my guess is I'm making the assumption that natives don't burn the same way as non-natives. So that's very important. We also, our general plan encourages water conservation. Non-native plants don't, absorb more. Native plants take less water. That's less.
Okay, but I don't think the discussion here is the value of native versus non-native. I can agree with you. I maybe think native trees are far better than non-native. But I think the discussion, as I see it, is how do you incentivize someone to put a native tree in instead of a non-native tree? I think the way it's written to say, well, if you put in native, you can do 3 instead of 4.
I think it's the cost savings that will incentivize them. That's the idea of
on a large
the 3 versus
multi-million-dollar
4.
development. I don't think there's a swag on the tree side, on the native versus non-native is what I'm saying. It's like I really don't think I'd
Well,
rather go.
the
with,
last project we looked at on El Camino Real couldn't fit all the trees on the site, right?
Well, that was because of the housing density bonus law that allowed him to waive the fact that he had to put the bloody trees in the first place, and then he still complained about it. But that was a decision that was based on the housing density bonus law, not the mature tree ordinance.
I think the unintended consequence of upping that number for natives is that you'll get fewer natives planted. You might get more trees overall, right? You're getting that 1 extra tree, but you'll decrease the number of native trees planted.
Evan, you were the one who was working with UFAC. How did this discussion go?
It's as Commissioner Dalton is explaining. We meant this to incentivize the use of natives, whether it be a financial incentive for developers or they don't have enough space. It's a means of saying, if you use natives, you'll have to do less replacement.
I have a hard time disagreeing with the logic, and I can't counter to you right now. I'm going to go home and probably wake up at
Come
2
back to
o'clock
it.
in the morning, or I can always
Call it at midnight
attend the next UFAC meeting and suggest a change there.
It appears that in lieu fee is similar in its use. It's sort of although it's to try to incentivize them to replace trees or relocate them whenever possible.
Well, the in lieu fee is the last of the scenarios. So it's the lowest of the mitigation hierarchy. So the intent is that hopefully they would be able to preserve or relocate or replace. And if none of those are feasible as determined by their arborist and as corroborated by our city arborist, then the in lieu fee is available.
Is there math for the in lieu fee so that
This maybe is a broader discussion that I have. It seemed like this ordinance relies extensively on ISA certified arborists. You've got to get one to write a report that you don't have trees on your property. You have to get one to certify after 3 years that they're still healthy. At every step of this thing, there's a certified arborist writing a report, down to what is the in lieu fee going to be? Well, go get a certified arborist to determine the value of what these trees are. So I don't know. It seems like a really large bureaucratic requirement of all the reports that have to be written, and they have to be installed or trimmed or pruned under the supervision of a certified arborist. You've done all of this stuff, you still have to hire the same an arborist to come back 3 years later to tell you that the tree is still living.
So we did hear from a few public comments. It seemed to be property owners with businesses that seemed to be concerned about the implementation of some sort. And I guess I was going along with that sort of thinking. It is the additional cost to them of having to provide these documents. Was that your sense as well?
Yes, there is certainly some additional costs to applicants, as well as to the city to administer this ordinance.
I put that out there for for us to stew on. We can come back to it. Brent, you listed the applicability of who this ordinance applies to as one of the very first things. I'm a little uncomfortable in the way it's written. It excludes every single family house in the neighborhood. So we're immediately excluding, I don't know, 90% of the residential zone. It feels like it's a weapon to be used against development. And I feel very conflicted. I agree with everything that's been said. It's great for the environment. It's urban heat. All sorts of very positive reasons to have trees. But I feel like this ordinance leaves all sorts of things. It's all being put on the multifamily and commercial developers, that it's on them to protect every tree on their property. And if it has to be removed, they have to do a report and then replace it 3-to-1. It feels a little bit like we want all these trees and we want someone else to provide them. We'll plant them on our own property.
It also significantly overlaps with the municipal tree ordinances that we already have.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doubling down almost 50%.
Yeah. So I'm uncomfortable, I think, in several ways about that. It's really, who is this being applied to, and their obligations for the reporting and the maintenance and the pruning and everything else about these trees. To your point, Bob, about right-of-way, I would think that a city has a certain spacing of trees that they find appropriate along a sidewalk, right? That you don't want them every 10 feet, you want them every 30 feet. There's some ratio of that. So, but if you take out a street tree and are required to replace it 3-to-1, how do you fit a street tree along the sidewalk in that same?
I think you're allowed to put the remaining trees in a park. As long as it's someplace else, you can, the 3-to-1, if you can't fit it on your property, you can put it in a city park or another place in the city. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. There's a hierarchy, on-site would be the first option, and then off-site right-of-ways, and then off-site parks, and then other off-site properties.
Doesn't the city who's doing this right-of-way work, don't they have always the ability or right to go put a tree in any park they choose?
I think on the right-of-way in front of our neighborhood, I think that you have to maintain it as a private citizen, and the city can tell you what tree to put in it. So you can't just go outside and knock it down if it's in the city right-of-way. Is that correct?
If there's a tree located within the city right away, it's the city's. You can't go out and just cut it down because it'd be comparable to going and cutting down a light post in the city, right? It's still considered a city asset. In terms of maintenance, if it's within the city right away, the city should be maintaining that tree. We keep a ongoing record of that, and that's why we have the city maintenance contractor that we're doing routine maintenance on all city maintained trees.
Okay.
I was really amazed that the city has on their website an inventory, and you can see all of these trees that belong to the city.
Yeah.
As far as this ordinance, if we take it from the top, the thing that we're trying to nail down is the definition of what is a mature tree, right? And I think they did a good job, except the list of trees, I would take a broader list of natives. Maybe it's the wording. Maybe all they need to do is just say, these are examples, and they could just include all the California native tree species, including these examples, or something. But it's easier if we're trying to nail a definition down to use an existing list.
Okay.
And I think when we look at this, that if the tree arborist is going to be determining replacement trees, then I feel comfortable that the sizes will add up appropriately for what's been removed. I think this is a really good start for a mature tree ordinance, and anything that we can move along is a whole lot better than what we have now, which doesn't protect anything. About single family, I think the right-of-way trees and in the parkway that belong to the city, we're going to just have to be happy with that, even though 60-some% of the city lives in single-family homes. Some of those are probably condominium, not single-family lot with one house. And so I think most people, like myself, we like our trees. We wouldn't want to remove them because they provide shade and wildlife habitat that we like to see. So I don't think it's a huge issue that exempts single family. I think that probably was done to avoid a lot of pushback.
Yeah, it seems like we are exempting ourselves, that we should retain our property rights to do what we want on our properties. But if you're a multifamily property owner, you shouldn't have the same rights as I do as a single-family property owner to plant the trees I want or remove the trees I don't want.
I have a question how this relates to like an urban lot split. You know what I mean? You have your lot, and then you're split it, and then you're putting in multiple single-family houses on what was one lot, single-family house, and the ADUs. I don't know how this relates to that.
So there's a new state law that says that a city cannot have different rules for SB 9 units than it does for regular single-family home units. So as currently drafted, this would apply to single-family units, so we couldn't treat them differently than urban lot split lots.
Okay, so those would be the exempt as well?
Yes.
So this doesn't apply to any single-family residences. Even if I have my single-family residence, I'm going to basically do a tear-down rebuild and take my 1,800 square foot house and make it a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house on my property and take out my mature trees. And now I've pulled permits and I've done everything. The city knows now when I submit my plans that I'm taking out my mature trees.
Correct, pursuant to the mature tree ordinance, but the cap does require a replacement one-to-one tree, and I'm not sure if single-family homes are exempt from that.
No, they would not be exempt from that. So the cap has a requirement for one-to-one replacement of mature tree, which again is not yet defined, and that would still maintain in place for all single-family properties.
I would like to follow up on Commissioner Dalton's comment about the burden on commercial properties. So again, walking through a scenario, there's a tree out in front of my property. Its roots are coming up and affecting the sidewalk. Okay, but it's on my property. The sidewalk is city property. My insurance company comes over to me and says, hey, you need to fix that. So I've got to come, so under that scenario, the owner of the commercial property has to come in and say, hey, I'm going to have to take down that tree. And if the tree is a native tree, I think it's M1 on page 18. There's two different ratios here. There's the 3-to-1 at M2, and then there's the 2-to-1 for natives on M1. So there's two different ratios here. So let's just say I have to take the tree down because the insurance company is telling me I have to take the tree down. How does that obligation to the commercial property owner saying, I got to take the tree down? Can they take the tree down if it's a mature tree, or if it is a mature tree and it's affecting their business, it's affecting their ability to get insurance and service their customers? They can come in, walk me through. They come in, ask for an application. It's a big tree, so it's going to be beyond 11 inches. It's a mature tree under the ordinance.
If they have justification from an insurance company saying it poses some sort of risk, then yes, subject to this ordinance, they would say, okay, well, that's reasons for removal. Can they replace it? Yes, no. If it's no, can they pay an in lieu fee?
Or can they, I guess they could relocate it, but let's assume you can't relocate the tree. That's a given,
Right.
because it's mature.
So Bob, this is relating a little bit to what the speaker today was outlining in one of his bullet points, right?
Right, yeah.
An arborist comes in and certifies this tree needs to be removed.
Well, I'm saying that
why should you have to go plant 3 more trees because of a tree that you never intended to take out, but it's unhealthy or it's a danger, or the insurance company is telling you can't have it, and you want to put a replacement, 1, right? Or like,
I think it's is it 1 for 1, or is it 2 to 1 if it's native?
It's
Do
2
I
to
follow
1.
M2 or M1?
So it depends if you're replacing it on the same site or off-site. If it's on-site, then it starts at 3 to 1, and then if it's native, it drops down to 2 to 1. If you're starting with off-site, then it's 4 to 1 and can drop down to 3 to 1 if native.
Right. So, yeah, the tree's gotten too big and it's causing problems. So the insurance company says I have to get rid of it. I can get rid of it. I just have to replace it under M1 or M2.
yeah, but I tend to agree with the speaker that there ought to be conditions that don't trigger the in lieu fee or the replacement, the 3 to 1, 2 to 1, 4 to 1 conditions, because this is presumably it's a guy who doesn't even he's not intensifying the development of his property. He just has a sick tree, or he has an insurance company or a fire hazard.
Right.
There should be something that says, hey, you can go take care of that nuisance.
And right now the code is M1 or M2, off-site or on-site. 1 tree, 2 to 1 for native. So that's how it currently reads. And you're saying, that's a burden that person shouldn't have to do. But I think the whole justification is like, we need an urban canopy, we have heat sink issues, and so you have to, if you're taking a tree down, you have to replace the tree.
I still get hung up on that because we're saying we need this canopy, but we'd rather someone else do it on their property and not on, like, by exempting the majority of the city, we're saying it's a really important thing to us, but we don't really want to do it on our own property.
I think, yes, because clearly if it's exempts, clearly the code exempts X% of the city.
Yeah. If we could loop back to something that Susan brought up earlier, Susan had 2 points. The definition of mature tree and whether a list should be included in this and how extensive that list should be, or should it just make reference to an other source that tracks native trees. On the first point, I'm really comfortable with the way they've defined a mature tree. I don't have any qualms with that, and if I see a general head nodding that I don't think any of us are concerned about that definition. As it relates to the list, does anybody have concerns about what trees are on that list, or should we just be referencing a third party organization that maintains a list of these?
Well, that's a great question. Can we ask them, Evan and the arborists, why they selected their own select list versus a wider list?
Yeah, I can give some background. So this is the California Native Plant Society website, CalScape tool. You type in your city, it lists the mature, or not mature, the native trees, shrubs, it gets down to flowers, grasses, succulents. So we started by going onto this list, typing in Encinitas and taking all the trees and shrubs. We started with that. We looked at species that may have been duplicative that we didn't think needed to be listed twice, and we pared it down to get the list that we have today.
Is there a procedure for adding a tree? Like if a homeowner, questions that maybe there's a different native that they want to use, is there a process outlined in the ordinance for them to petition or the city council or the planning commission over time to say, we want this other tree included on that list? Or is this a list that's basically fixed?
It's fixed as designed, yeah.
They're not inventing any new native trees.
For me, I think if they just adjust this wording a little bit, additionally, it means any native tree species, and then instead of including hybridized varieties is fine, but listing below with a diameter of 9 inches, somehow change that wording. So I know, Chris, you're really good with wording. Maybe you could suggest something that includes these but doesn't exclude other natives, that all natives go to 9-inch.
If we could try to avoid the editing and the punctuation and all, I'd like to convey our concerns or our goals to the staff and enable them to write it in response to our concerns to come back.
And I think what staff is saying is they want this to be the finite list and not include anything else, which is why they wrote it this way.
So as a commission, are we comfortable with a defined list that doesn't expand?
Well, it misses sycamore, which is, a very important native tree. It misses redbud.
Yeah, but you
California redbud.
you heard their methodology. You don't believe that this CalScape website is the source they should use?
This website's good.
Okay, so this website says that those 2 trees are not native to
It
Encinitas.
doesn't. Oh, I'm looking at it right now.
The western sycamore is listed on there.
And so that's not on the list of our ordinance?
It is in the ordinance.
Oh, so
Where? Third one. What about the western redbud? Circus occidentalis. I guess I'll ask the arborist if that's considered. Maybe it's on the website. I guess if we're using the website, I guess we should just type it into the website.
It is considered a native. I would need to look and see what the mature tree sizes that those actually get to. Maybe Mr. Wisniewski knows off the top of his head. Typically, we don't see them getting to those larger sizes within the city, but it was not listed here.
So
on CalScape.
you're saying it's not enough that it's native, it has to be native and grows to a size that would replicate what's being.
Be able to get to a mature
Okay, makes sense.
size. But then it was taken down in terms of size classifications for species like scrub oaks, because those are important. The city of Encinitas is named after them. So we did take the size diameter down for scrub oaks specifically.
I think my western redbud at home has got a 4-inch diameter. So it may not be a scrub oak, but I can't plant it as a replacement tree just because it doesn't get big enough. I guess that's a question.
Evan could maybe chime in here. It can be. You don't have to put back in the same trees that you're taking out.
But I guess it's on the palette if a commercial property owner wants to put in a western redbud because his ficus tree has turned up his tree roots, technically he's not allowed to do that because it's not on the list. And that goes back to Commissioner Dalton.
Or he can put 4 in, he could go non-native.
He could go non-native as part of his 2-to-1, right? Or his 3-to-1.
Depends on 4-to-1 if it's.
It's M1, so I guess that's a replacement tree.
So I guess what we're trying to work around is,
Yes.
are people comfortable that the list is finite, or do they want
A mechanism.
a mechanism to add other trees or a website to go refer to? And if you can show the city that that tree shows up on the thing. The arborist is pointing out that maybe some value decisions have been made that even though there may be a tree that's also native to this area, it doesn't achieve the size that we would hope to be replaced. Presumably an 11-inch or 9-inch diameter tree is coming out. You want something that may ever get back up to that size.
That's a big tree.
Right, like the redbud doesn't get so big in girth.
Okay.
But
Right.
maybe the arborist can be the person who makes the call.
They're going to be too busy writing all these other reports.
No, but I think your point's well taken. If there a mechanism, just from an ordinance standpoint, there should be a mechanism to appeal. I don't like it. I want to put one in, and I want that to qualify. And right now, There isn't. So I guess the question in a general ordinance, is there a process? And I think that's what you're calling it. Whether you agree with the list or not.
Yeah, I don't feel qualified to tell you which trees should
I
be
know.
on that or
Yep.
not on that.
I mean, you could add a line like, or, other tree as approved by the city's arborist. I mean,
There
is that what you're thinking?
could be a way to petition to add a tree,
Right.
that can be evaluated by either the city's arborist or the community development director or some person with some authority.
That's more of a technical ordinance issue, and I think that's a good point. I think,
I think there's a general head nod, and we
Yeah,
can
that's-
maybe move past that one and
Yes.
say that's something that you guys can hear our comments. Does anybody need a break? We're just passing 8 o'clock.
I could use a 5-minute break.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and be back here at 8:18. Okay?
Get your bar. Is that your snack?
Okay, we'll try to get back into it now. Thank you for that quick break. I'm just kind of going through my list here, you guys. One of the, we talked about like who this ordinance applies to. There's one part of this ordinance which says a tree within 25 feet of the property, is subject to all sorts of protections in this ordinance. But if that's not on your property, it seems very problematic to me. How you can protect a tree that's off your property, especially if the neighbor is being uncooperative, right? I mean, we saw it on Melba. There was a certain direction to try to prevent a project by protecting trees, and I could see how a neighbor there would say, don't come near my property. So how, is there any consensus or thinking about that subject?
Where is that? Can you point us to that?
Well, don't call it on
It's
this.
page 16, J1,
Thank you.
J1A.
Yeah, J1A. All mature trees located with, or on or within 25 feet of a private development site. 25 feet away is, on a 50-foot lot, that's halfway across your neighbor's property.
And to add on to that would be, someone had mentioned in an email, Mr. Doyle, joint ownership of trees. I think this is like kind of right on that, like what if it's on the property line, or maybe the trunk is on my property,
Right.
but everything hangs over your property, because you're my next door neighbor. Who is the deciding person?
Right.
Who's the decider?
Right.
Well, with
So-
this, it would be both, because if it's 25 feet, within 25 feet of both properties in that situation.
Yeah, so that's why I want to be interested to hear what his interpretation of how J1A is applied.
So J1A refers to what the site plan needs to include. It needs to show where this is happening, but that's not really the regulation. The regulation is at the top of page 14, so it's section G1, preservation. It says that mature trees that are located on or are within 25 feet or overhang a private development project site or public improvement project area shall be preserved and incorporated into the design of the development project except as provided in this section.
So if the neighbor says, don't come on my property, I don't want you surveying my trees, is there an out for that applicant to say, well, I tried to show you all the trees within 25 feet of my property, but I don't have physical access to that property?
Right, so I'm the developer, you're the neighbor, the tree's on your property.
Right.
And,
I know if I prevent you from coming over, you can't measure what the trunk diameter is.
right,
So there's methods to be able to do that. So such as using Google Earth and using imagery to be able to see tree canopy, tree crown size. You can even get down to species in some instances. The diameter, if it's written in a report, you put in there a note that says, access was denied to the property. We weren't able to get it, and that's taken into consideration. However, you're able to, you can see a tree, right? With their two eyes, unless there's a wall preventing you from going, that there's, approximately this size tree within the property. Over time, arborists they're able to dial in, their approximations on trees, right? It's like a carpenter who can get within 1/10 of an inch sort of thing. Arborists tend to start getting pretty good at diameters and estimates, but what you do in that instance is you just note, hey, I was unable to access the property. Based on my expertise and knowledge, this was the anticipated size, species of this tree that exists. And, that's sometimes as good as it can get without being able to have access to it. The last thing is the intent here is that this is showing protection of those trees. It's not to remove them, but to ensure that neighboring trees are protected during this process and will not be negatively impacted by any additional development that's happening.
So if it's a, and thank you for that clarification, but if it's a, 15-foot radius tree, a 30-foot diameter tree, and it's 25 feet away, so it does not overhang your property, and you're supposed to put a protective fence around the drip line of this tree or something, like, does that protective fencing stop at your property, or are you required to go out to that tree and protect it?
No, it would be on the development piece of the property, so you would not be putting tree protection fencing on the adjacent property owners. So say it was at the lot line and there's a fence there, right? You would go out from the tree protection zone and put a fence line out to protect that during the development phase. So there's no additional going on to somebody else's property sort of thing.
So this is just the requirement to identify that those trees are there and do the measurements if you can, but then don't do anything else?
Yes, to not impact your neighbor's tree.
Yeah, on page 14, item G, G1, mature trees located within 25 feet of a private development project shall be preserved and incorporated into the design of the development project. So, but you're saying that that just doesn't extend to doing anything off your property?
I'm not sure. Is there state law that supersedes in terms of being able to prune a tree that comes over your property line?
But this is saying it doesn't even have to go over your property line.
Right. I'm a little bit skeptical of our ability to prevent a property owner from removing a tree that the neighbor's tree is encroaching, trespassing on my property, and have to continue to allow that to occur. It's starting, maybe I'm missing something, but this seems problematic.
Yeah, I could see if it overhangs your property, I think you're allowed to trim it. It's on your property. But this may not even be on your property. Would you like to address the commission?
Two things. A tree where the trunk is on both properties, they're co-owners of the tree, and they both have equal representation. On whether you have the right to prune overhanging branches and roots, people used to think that they could. There's case law, Buxa v. Patel, decided about 12 years ago that encroaching roots, you could not cut them back to the property line, or you could not do any pruning that severely damaged the tree. So it kind of left it a nebulous there. It didn't have an exact description, but the intention was that the trees would not be damaged.
Okay.
And at Torrey Crest, I was the project arborist. We worked at each of the adjoining property owners multiple times, multiple visits, and we did as big of tree protection zones on the Torrey Crest side as we could.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody share my concern about the number of arborist reports that are required to do this project, to the point that if there are no mature trees on your site, you have to have an arborist report to tell you that there's no mature trees?
Like a mini arborist report? I don't know. I mean, I'm just wondering if there could be some truncated.
Pun intended.
Yeah. That wasn't. That was just happened naturally. No, I see your point. I mean, you can, but I guess the point of the report is that it can then be brought to the city to prove that there's no mature tree.
Yeah.
But can there be another avenue to do that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems like some things could be pretty obvious, and that the city, maybe the burden of proof would be back to the city to say, we don't believe that there's no trees on your site? Or, I mean, they go out and look?
Yeah, I guess my thought there is it's better to have the base. And if the certified ISA arborist has gone to the site and says there's no trees, well, then going forward, then everything of the tree ordinance applies and everything in municipal code applies. If you don't do it at the very beginning, then I think there's subject to interpretation. So I kind of think that the first time around is important because it establishes a baseline of a tree. Is it a mature tree? Is it a native tree? And you basically take an inventory of it. Going forward, it might be over arboristed along the way. But I think the beginning is important just to establish. And yes, it might be to establish there are no trees there. That's a pretty quick report and shouldn't be much of a financial burden to the applicant to hire someone to go out and say there's no trees, here's the report.
If there are no mature trees, then wouldn't that then release some of the burden for the additional reports related to any mature trees? Like if there aren't any to start with and the other reports.
Yeah, I
don't
presume
need to
this
be
whole
done.
thing no longer applies.
Right.
So you'd want to do it at the beginning just to make sure you categorize yourself and eliminate maybe any future obligation. So it's a burden. It should be fairly efficient to do so. If you have a redwood forest, then that might be a different story. Right?
Chairman Dalton, if I may, just to clarify, any new development application project already has to submit an arborist report that does an assessment of all trees on site. So that could be, check the same box if they're doing a development project.
So maybe we could remove that requirement too?
I wasn't suggesting that.
Okay. I mean, as a person that, all of us read 1,000 pages of staff report because there's every possible arborist, traffic, parking, gnat catcher, everything report, maybe this would be one less thing we have to review.
But they already are
Yeah,
needing it.
I'm being facetious.
So-
I'm sorry. They're required to do it, then they're going to do it regardless. It seems a bit absurd to me.
Well, then that goes to council. Is redundancy required? To Commissioner Dalton's position that if it's already required in the code, why is it in the ordinance? Not that we have to read another paragraph, but I'm just asking, is redundancy a good thing in city codes, or should we take the extra effort to reduce redundancy?
If I may, it would be consistent with the development application requirements, but if someone came in, say, for redevelopment, where maybe they wouldn't have to do an arborist report for the scope of that improvement, but if they are redeveloping and they're affecting landscaping, then that would be an additional report on them. So there are some circumstances in which it's not duplicative, but it is specifically applicable to that situation. We try to write the code so that they're consistent with one another. We don't want to create inconsistencies.
To move on, I'm satisfied with that answer. I had another concern about, this is under the preservation during construction activity, and it talks about and I'm looking specifically at item H5A, a tree protection and preservation plan. And my question is simply, is this yet a plan that needs to be developed, a custom plan by an arborist to do this, or could the city have prescriptive measures that someone could follow, saying, do 3 of these measures, a protective fence at the drip line, this sign, this and that? But this seems to be, says that this plan shall address issues related to protective fencing, kind of things, but it's not very specific or prescriptive about what they need to do.
It is when you go to the UFMP, and maybe we can add that code section. The existing UFMP has
see
the
it.
criteria, but that's a good point. We can add that specific section of the code. It's noted elsewhere, but maybe we can add it in that section as well.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay. Can someone maybe, in the very early sections of this, where it's talking about what's considered a mature tree, and it talks about a native tree, I believe, being 9 inches, a non-native tree being 11 inches in diameter. I'm trying to find it. But then there's something that if it's 4 inches in diameter, that's considered a mature tree, but I thought I heard earlier someone referred to those as shrubs or chaparral.
It has to do with species and species growth. And so scrub oaks are very slow, much slower growing species. And so at maturity, they tend to, their stems are only, 4, 5, 6 inches in diameter at most at maturity. So as I said, it's a slower growing species. So we wanted to make sure that we accounted for that in protection of scrub oaks within the city. Going back to something that we were talking about earlier in terms of, say, western redbuds, they're not as slow growing of a species. They can get bigger, but I've never seen one get to a substantial size within the city of Encinitas. I do concur, with the lists as it stands. I think it's appropriate for this area, but in reference to Cal Landscape, et cetera. But again, that's the reason for the smaller diameter on scrub oaks, because they are slower growing species.
Yeah. Is it fair or logical is a 4-inch scrub oak of the same value as an 11-inch Torrey pines as it relates to heat island effect, tree canopy, all of this stuff? I mean, does that tree, the presence of a 4-inch tree, equate the same as an 11-inch tree of a different species?
In terms of heat island effect reduction and carbon sequestration, it's not going to be on the equivalent basis. However, from an environmental standpoint and from the native bugs and the environment that it helps diversity and all of that, that's why is equal to, if not more important, of a species to make sure that we're including those oak trees that are slower growers because of their ecological importance, which may be equal to or exceed the value of even a larger tree, depending on how you look at it.
To pair it with an earlier conversation where we said certain trees are not on the list because even at maturity they are not thought to achieve a certain size that we were trying to replace. And so with this, I forget the tree already, we're talking about scrub oak. That's not on the native tree list, or is it on the native tree list? It would be allowed to be planted even though it's not expected to ever achieve a size?
They are on the native tree list as well.
Yeah.
So I noticed that the California bottle brush isn't on the list, and I know that it originated in Australia. Is that why? Is it considered a non-native even though it's become native?
You said California bottle brush, or are you referring to California pepper?
Bottle brush.
Oh, the red. Yeah, no, that's still not. It naturalized as not native. So
Okay.
we
so
do
it's not
exclude
considered,
those.
even though the trunk would be, it'd just be a mature tree,
It would just fall under the mature tree and not under the native.
not a native.
To the commissioners, I guess I have a certain hang-up about you can do everything right. Plant the trees, mend the soil, irrigate, something, and that tree may die, right? And And we have burdened the developer or the applicant with, a certified arborist observing the work, the pruning is going to be done with a certified arborist, every step of the way. So through no fault of their own, presumably that tree may die in 3 years. And I'm a little uncomfortable that in 3 years, then this whole replacement thing is going to kick back in.
I consider it cost of doing business risk.
Yeah.
There's inherent risk in all business.
I hear that, and I guess I hear a pretty constant refrain of that in some form or the other. I feel like there's a massive balancing of our budget on someone else's dime. That's ultimately, throughout this, there's a little nuances of this diameter, that diameter, but ultimately it feels like we're really burdening
when I
new
worked in
development.
Santa Ana at the college, and they landscaped, they didn't connect the landscape irrigation, and all the trees, big trees that they'd put in were dying. And I was on the facilities committee, and I was the environmental task force person, and I brought it to their attention, and that's when they told me, oh, the water isn't on. And I said, so you're just going to let your trees die? So I've seen it go both ways, and I would say 90-some% of the time, when trees don't survive, it's human error. I'm sorry, I've just seen it that way. But it's also the cost of business.
I'm going to piggyback on that because, so on the relocation of the trees, so trees relocated, and then 3 years later, a certified arborist has to evaluate the success of the relocation. But in the meantime, the person who owned the property that paid for the relocation isn't the one that's maintaining it for those 3 years, right? It's maybe the city if it's moved to if it's placed on public land. Who pays the cost for the report of the certified arborist?
So it's specified that relocation has to occur on site. If you can't relocate on site, then you move down to the replacement.
So for replacement, is there the same requirement or no?
No, replacement can occur off site.
But to that point, in a 3-house subdivision, a developer comes in and puts in the trees, sells 3 houses, and they move on. And 3 years later, one of those trees dies or multiple. Who has to, where is the developer? He may not even be identifiable anymore. How is he going to pay for the arborist report to come in 3 years and certify it? And if one of them does die, who's going to pay to replace that tree? Will it become the homeowner's responsibility?
Yes, that of the property owner.
Mm-hmm. So when you buy that house, you get a little real estate disclaimer that says, by the way, you have a commitment in 3 years to hire an arborist, certify this tree, and replace it if it's poor.
It would be a condition of approval that would have to be placed on the project to enforce it, correct?
And to piggyback on that, but all of your neighbors don't have that same obligation because they're not covered under the tree ordinance code because the
tree wasn't relocated to their property.
Correct. So they're burdened because they're a new ownership and a tree was right. So it becomes a burden to the unique person out of all of the houses in Encinitas. If you're new, right, you're going to have that tree obligation.
And then what if you buy that house from the developer and then you sell it in 2 years? Do you have to disclose it to the new buyer that they now have this obligation in a year to have a certified arborist come out to the house? And
you have a special tree.
Yeah.
You're special.
I
understand the class. Now you've created a separate class of homeowners who have a separate obligation for the tree. Right. Just to confirm, I think this would be absurd, but if that tree had to be replaced, it wouldn't be considered a mature tree that now had to have 3 trees planted in its place.
if the developer.
We grew really fast.
Well, what if the developer says it goes as a really nice big box and it turns out it's a 4-inch native tree and it dies? Now are they? It's still identified as a new tree for our purposes. They're not doing a 3-to-1 replacement of that tree.
Yeah, if it was already a replacement tree, like one of 3, and one of those dies, you would just have to replace that one. It wouldn't be a multiplier down the line.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, but so my questions all, I think, tend to center around this idea that we're creating a class of people that are already here and are largely not affected by this ordinance to be burdened or paid for by people that aren't here that may eventually show up and want to develop a project. We haven't talked about it, but I think it was Keith Harrison wrote a fairly lengthy letter.
Yeah.
I thought made several compelling points that this is, falls heavily on the commercial.
It clearly does, but on your other point, if I move in and I do a remodel on my house, I have to sprinkler the house. I'm subject to the new codes. So that doesn't seem to be any different than anybody else coming in versus the neighbor next door who has an old house who hasn't done the remodel and doesn't have to have sprinklers in their house. So I think that all the codes and the trees just become one of those many codes that if you're moving into Encinitas and you're a new house, you'll be burdened by the new codes. And if I have to have a 30-year-old house, I'm not burdened by those codes. So I don't see how the tree is any different than the sprinklers or any other EMC code. On the first point, the second point, creating a separate class of people with this legacy tree is, I'm having a hard time not disagreeing with you because it does create this legacy. If it's disclosed, then people know it when they go in. They can choose to buy the house or not. So the question is a deed restriction, or I don't know how you solve that problem.
I don't know how you enforce that. I mean,
So what I'm hearing, Commissioner Dalton, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're requesting that L3 be deleted, condition L3, L3 and then, I guess, 8, both of the times when it talks about the 30-day requirement. Would that resolve your concerns? So it's within the ordinance, so on page 17 of 80, at the bottom of page 17 is that section 3L3. It talks about 30 days after 3 years.
in 3, oh yeah.
And then there's a similar provision at the top of page 19.
Right. I made yes, at the top of 19, item 8, I was concerned about the 30 days. I was thinking that maybe we'd want to discuss whether it was 60 days. But I do have a general sense, you're not far off, that these passages in their entirety kind of concern me.
Right, the 3-year rule of section 8 would
Right.
be deleted.
Right.
It sort of reminds me of low flow requirements, how people, when they sell a property, have low flow fixture, right? It's got to have it. And if they didn't have it before the sale is closed, you have to put them in. But then after they get the house, no one ever comes and checks if they took them out
Right.
until the house sells.
Right.
So,
Your
I
example.
mean, you can't regulate and enforce every little detail all the time. It's pretty tough.
Your example of low flow, and Bob, your example of fire sprinklers are persuasive, but they also apply uniformly to everybody. Like, I get it, codes change, and if I do a new project now, I comply with the current code. But what we're putting in here is an ordinance that says this applies to about 15% of the population, and the rest of us that live in single family, we can remodel at will, we can add an ADU, we can do any sort of improvement we want to our houses and not be affected by this ordinance. So, go ahead. Oh, yes, would you like to address? This is one of the benefits of being the only person in the audience. One of the few benefits.
I appreciate the opportunity. What some projects and communities do is they have the developer post a bond for the 3-year period. So the money is already there with the expectation if the tree has to be replaced, the money's there. If it doesn't have to, the bond reverts back to the developer.
Okay, good point.
That's
Okay.
great. I like that.
But that won't change, Commissioner Dalton, the idea that there's a commercial versus residential. I don't think that addresses that point.
No, it doesn't, but, you know, and I struggle with that point.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, that's the extent of my list. And the to Susan's point about moving forward, have we talked about each of the issues that were important to each of you?
Yes, thank you. Been very helpful. And staff also, thank you very much. A lot of nuance here.
Did you want to discuss any more your issue with 70% of Encinitas being exempt from this, the single family? Or do you, I know we discussed it when we had our joint meeting. I think we spent quite a bit of time on it at that point. And I think the way it's written now is with that exclusion as a result of the conversation that happened within that bigger group.
Right.
I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I just think that that's some of the history.
Right.
But I'm happy to stay and discuss that if
I'm
you want
conflicted.
to.
As a property owner, I don't really want the city telling me how to trim or prune my trees and what I can or can't do with the trees in my yard. So I get why there's a single-family exemption, but I also look at it and say, well, shoot, if this was so important to the city for climate action and environmental concerns that we should be doing this stuff, why did we exempt such a large portion of the city from doing it? Given our history with the R30 sites and the contentious, I mean, it does feel like it's a weaponized ordinance, almost tailor-made to specifically towards developers.
But I think it's really difficult to enforce such a big segment. And it's easier if it's new construction than if it's a house that was built like 80 years ago.
Well, yeah, and it's easier because they're not here to oppose it either. So, you know, I've stated my concerns and my thoughts on that. It may not sway you guys, and that's part of the process here. We can entertain a motion and see where we can find consensus and move through it, or if you feel there needs to be more debate or discussion.
Move to approve the resolution for the mature tree ordinance.
Just to maybe as from an administrative process here, were there any modifications that I mean, we've been giving some comments to staff along the way, but I think of the issues we discussed, which trees are on the list, I think we accepted that the list is finite and we understood how it got to be where it is. So no modification to that. We've talked about where this applies, that 25 feet off the property, that's through an aerial image, and you can't be held to the accuracy of something that you're not allowed to touch. So the radius of the trunk, we've defined. None of us had a concern about the size of what a mature tree is. Right-of-way streets, did we resolve what the city would do? I guess if they were replacing right-of-way trees, they would put them, and they don't want to increase the density of trees on the actual sidewalk, they would put them off-site in a park or a nearby public space.
Correct. And then the arborist explained to me that if it was a non-native tree that was fallen, then it would not have to be replaced with the existing tree, like my example, and he said it would be replaced with the tree that's on the list.
Yeah. To this gentleman's point earlier, there was one code section that basically said if an arborist certifies that a tree is unhealthy or is in danger, or an insurance company says it has to be removed, it can be removed, but then the code, it goes on to say, under the replacement and in lieu provisions of this section. And there was a suggestion to remove that language that would basically said there is conditions where a homeowner or a property owner would be allowed to remove a tree and not replace it when it was triggered by what we might say an activity outside of their control. It was diseased, it was an insurance issue, and that seems like some small consolation to, say, a commercial property owner who, to correct a root issue with an ADA path or something, is going to do some work, but isn't intending to replace a 4-to-1 ratio or a 3-to-1.
I get the disease or an accident, but if you replace, say, a tree that's destroyed sidewalks, I don't see why that. We still have urban sink. We have urban heat issues. We have canopy issues. If you're taking out a tree it's overgrown, just flat out, it's in the sewer lines, it needs to be removed. I don't have a problem requiring that person to replace it with one of the trees on the list.
But how about 3 trees? Or 4?
That's right, 4 if it's not native. Or is it 3-to-1 or 2-to-1? Yeah, but
We could make it a 1-to-1 under those particular circumstances, or suggest that it's be made 1-to-1.
well, the difference between the 2-to-1, 3-to-1, in my understanding is, let's just take a 30-year-old tree that's diseased and it's got a decent canopy, but you're replacing them with a couple of small trees. It's going to take a while to replace that canopy. So that's, I think, why you're doing the 2 or 3-to-1. Again, it shouldn't be a huge financial burden. The trees aren't, well, it's going to cost you probably more money to cut it down and haul it away than it's going to be to put a new tree in place. And I think the idea is, under the Climate Action Plan, you lose a big tree, you're going to put some small trees in, it's going to take you 20 years. You just put one tree in, you're never going to get back to the canopy. So I think the Climate Action Plan and the general plan is trying to keep that canopy going, so the burden of replacing a 30-year-old tree with a couple of 5-year-old trees, I don't have a problem with that, I guess, in the big scheme of things. Yes, it's a burden. Yeah, but I agree, it is a burden to that person, and it's unique to the commercial property owner and not to others.
I would support
And
the language changes as they've been suggested.
Okay,
I
to
would
remove
support
the
that.
replacement requirement for
And
trees.
the in lieu fee. If
And the
they
in
get
lieu
a
fee, yeah.
certified arborist to show that one of these conditions has occurred, they've already, they've already paid their price.
Okay. I'm just trying to put a pin in that subject. It sounds like Brent and I are maybe of a similar mind on that. Bob is not on that list. Susan or Chris, do you want to chime in on where you stand? Or we can.
I'm kind of in the 1-to-1 replacement in this particular situation, but that's not anything that's been really supported.
third way.
That's the third idea. I think I would tend to support Steve and Brent on this one, under these particular circumstances,
So
considering the rest of the document.
So you're saying that if it's a diseased tree is dead, any of these 4 bullets that are up on the board, you don't have to replace the tree. Is that is that what you're saying?
What's wrong with having the developer put up a bond, and so the burden doesn't fall on the owner, but on the original developer?
When does this
So
come
I
into, when
think
does
there's
exactly
two-
does this come into
Right.
play?
I see 2 different scenarios. We keep talking about developers, and we understand there are developers going to come scrape the land and put in a big building, all that.
Talking existing
But there's
tree
also
canopy.
just a business owner who has a tree in his courtyard or has a tree on his property and has no intention of redeveloping, but the tree is diseased, it's going to fall and, hurt somebody. And that tree should be removed.
Yep.
And should he have an obligation then to pay, an in lieu fee or in replacement tree, at 4-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, any of these ratios? I tend to favor no. I would, mention it to, Brent as well, but whether the 1-to-1, maybe you replace it with, another tree so that we can eventually get this thing. But that person wasn't voluntarily becoming a developer. Like they weren't
Right.
out to
No,
maximize.
but they
Isn't
bought
this
the
similar-
property, and they have a
isn't-
burden
isn't-
once they buy the property. I mean, they own the office building, they own the shopping center, they made a decision to buy it.
But aren't they
Not if
similar
we-
to this single-family person who has that same kind of tree that we're not requiring to replace it?
Yes, that's correct.
So if we're keeping them in line with that single-family person who,
But there is no we've exempted single family. So the
We
question
have.
is the commercial property owner required to replace the tree? And if it's diseased or if it's dead, you guys are thinking, no.
they're not doing any more development, they haven't pulled any additional permits, they have
Right.
a piece of property that has a tree,
You
and
could
they
be
happen to
left-
be a commercial owner
And you could
versus
be
a
left with a city
single-family
without,
owner.
and you could be left with a city with, under that analysis, you could be left with a city that has no trees on commercial properties, flat out.
Well, they'd have to, all of their trees would have had to have something happen to them like that.
Well, I mean,
That's why I
you
suggested
drive
the
through a parking
one-to-one.
lot of any commercial property and half the trees look like they're dead anyway. They're all these liquid ambers and they're all like just sticks. So they were required to put the tree in, get the development permit, which they did. They didn't maintain the tree. Now, maybe there's some enforcement to that. But basically what you're saying is you could eliminate the entire commercial canopy on commercial property because all the trees died and no one has to replace anything. And I just don't think that's the
I
right thing.
actually suggested one-to-one.
Yeah,
I mean,
I hear you. I would rather go 1-to-1
Yeah.
than none at all, and I'd like to go 2-to-1. But because it takes so long to replace the canopy. That's the ultimate goal in the climate action plan. That's the ultimate goal in the general plan is to have a tree canopy.
Well, not only that.
I respectfully
Encinitas
disagree. If the
has a
ultimate goal is
designation
to have
as
that
a
canopy,
tree
we
city,
would do it
right?
to single family, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, what's the point of being a tree city if you're not going to have ordinance that regulates the tree, I think it's important to have a replacement policy. I think the bond idea was a very good idea that was brought forward in public comment. And I
sounds
think
expensive
in
to
terms
maintain.
of, let's say lightning
City
hits a tree
perspective.
in the parking lot, right? It's not the commercial property's fault, So you could make an exclusion for that, but I wouldn't, because you're going to lose that tree. And so if we really want to be a tree city, if we really want to have a climate action plan that works, we have to think for the trees, because trees aren't here to speak. If you think about how indigenous people view plants, they think of them as beings. They don't think of them as an it. So, what can I say?
What about if a development permit for a shopping center or an office building has a landscape plan, and that landscape plan that was approved under the development permit required to have a tree, and somebody drives over the tree in their Hummer? Do they have to replace the tree? That's part of their building permit.
Well, I think that's a different issue. I
Okay.
mean, right, those trees likely are not mature trees, right? They're not, like you said, they're sticks in the parking lot. They haven't really grown to 11-inch diameter.
But the permit
or whatever.
required them to have a tree.
I think there was probably a monitoring period after the conclusion of the shopping center or something, and I don't know.
I don't know. I mean,
I think Patty may have an answer for us.
I asked the same question earlier today. So we have no way of enforcing that. There's not a bond or anything once it's been installed. And Katie, you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I had the same question, so.
So the result of that is all the original development permits and a tree that dies doesn't have to be replaced. So we're just going to be looking at barren parking lots with planters with no trees, and there's no way that we can enforce that.
Correct, but it does behoove the property owner to plant a tree and make it more aesthetically pleasing and help with, providing shade and all that. But
So
you
that
are
goes.
correct.
So that goes back to Commissioner Dalton's position that if a tree dies, at the moment, there's no way that we can force them to replace the tree under the current shopping center development, as my example, or an office building, or a multifamily, or a senior housing facility. They built the tree, it died, there's no obligation to replace it. So question for you pose is, why is that any different to the tree that died? And Mr. Harrison or anybody else who wrote a letter has to replace the tree.
So they still would have to comply with the city's landscaping ordinances and open space and all those sort of requirements and any conditions of approval that they have that do apply. But you're right. So if those other requirements don't apply, then there would not be a requirement. But you're absolutely right that if you didn't have that in this ordinance, then this ordinance wouldn't have a mechanism. But there may be some other mechanism out there.
But she just said there isn't.
So as far as enforcing on that, but for example, if, you have a subsequent development application and you say, hey, look, you're supposed to have X amount of open space, or you're supposed to have a certain amount of landscaping, you don't have that landscaping, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So it's a long-term solution.
Right.
Sometimes there are enforcement, but to your point, enforcement certainly would be a huge problem. It'd be difficult often. You're not always going to have an enforcement option.
So early this evening on the Dish Wireless, Christina, the planner, made the presentation. They applied for the towers, and thankfully she said, hey, you're out of compliance on your landscaping. So for us to issue the tower permit for your antennas, we're going to want you to become compliant with your landscaping. And that's a case of being able to go back to the ownership. In the case of another property owner and a commercial property being specific, if there's an application for an expansion, or they have to come back to the city for a permit of some kind, any kind, that would be the same opportunity that we saw this evening, like, hey, all your trees are dead in the parking lot. Is that where we're going to get the opportunity to make a change or to make a request?
So there's that certainly, and then also a lot of the more current applications have conditions of approval that say you need to have at least this many trees or whatever that is. We can enforce those conditions of approval. Now,
Right.
staff may have limited resources, we
Sure.
may not be tracking that down, so that it becomes an enforcement issue.
Right, well, it becomes when, in 4 years from now, when you come back for a application to expand, I can pull up the conditions of approval and say you're out of compliance. So at least I have a little bit of a hammer. Okay. So I would strongly support Commissioner Ryan's suggestion of a 1-to-1 versus a 0.
Okay. Brent, does that discussion change anything as you think about it?
No, I understand their position, and yeah, I would support a 1-to-1. I would prefer the in lieu fee be removed.
Okay. One other item that was brought up was the inclusion of the Coast Live Oak on the native list, and deferring to, or asking our arborist, it seemed like there was maybe a duplicate or a subspecies on the list, and does that make sense to you to simplify that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just nomenclature at that point, and it's such a niche species item. It has to do with like the hairs on the underside of the leaf versus not. So agrifolia, if you just go with that, it's good enough.
Okay. So
I have
Please.
one other suggestion. I think the section, this went to Brent's original comment about the organization, especially at the beginning, that the applicability, you have to go down to E to get to the applicability. And that's after listing all of the trees. So it's pretty far. It's E, but it doesn't start till, I think it's on like page 13 or something like that, until you know what this ordinance applies to. So I would make a suggestion that it be moved further up in the document. So if you know this even applies to you. I would also support taking out the 3-year requirements that you talked about, Steve, those
Okay.
2 sections.
Are there any other consensus around the 3-year checkup?
The bond is not that expensive because you just put up a fraction of the bond. So that shouldn't be a burden. It is paperwork for the people that own it, and it might just, you can set up the bond that it just expires. There's plenty of technicalities to it. But it does create an unusual burden to the subsequent property owners that I think, to Commissioner Ryan's point, it's really hard to practically enforce that. And you could do it through a deed restriction, but now it just seems like an undue burden, especially if the person that lives next door has a tree, then it's not applicable to them. So I think I would have to agree with Commissioner Ryan's position that I just, and actually yours too, Commissioner Dalton, about removing that section, the 3-year component.
Okay. Just for clarification, Katie, are we making a motion to
All these things?
approve, or are we just setting a recommendation to the city council?
It would be a recommendation to City Council.
Good, thank you. So,
But isn't this going back to UFAC and then from UFAC to City Council? So they're going to take our recommendations and then decide if they're going to submit them to City Council?
Do you know, Evan, is it going to go back to?
Meeting on the 27th of UFAC, and then they present to City Council.
Yeah, so we would include your recommendations to UFAC, but they are just an informational body, whereas you are an advisory body to City Council, but we will document all comments.
So what we do here, they'll look at UFAC, but what we do is submit it to City Council. Okay.
Correct.
okay, so I'm sensing maybe some consensus around 4 items. One is to reorder the ordinance so that the applicability of it is made clear or closer to the top of the document. That Coast Live Oak be whatever the cleanup is. If there is a subsidy, it be cleaned up to a single species tree. That we remove references to the 3-year checkup within 30 days after 3 years of time, that language, and that for under the certain conditions of disease that are certified by an arborist about what I would call the unintended demise of a tree, that the replacement is limited to 1-to-1 and not the full force of the rest of the ordinance.
Can we, any thoughts on if it's 1-to-1, make it a native tree and versus a non-native tree? Seeing that the benefits associated with the non-native tree, or the native tree outweighs the growth issues and the plants and the bugs and the birds and things like that.
Okay.
And then it would be a 1 to, or you could do 2 non-native trees? No, it has to be
think
native.
we
I
should
feel like it's
one
starting
to-
to snowball away
Yeah.
from where I wanted it to be in the
I
first
think
place.
1 a native. Is that what you're thinking about, Bob?
I like 1 native, but I'll certainly defer to the tree people if 2 trees are better than 1 native, and that's outside of my purview. I think 1 native is better, but I'm going to ask the tree expert what you would consider to be the best.
I think you're phrasing the question the wrong way. It's not what's 1 or 2 better, is 1 or 0 better.
Well, there was a suggestion by someone that 2-to-1, 2 off the list, or 2 native. So I'm just going to put it over to you.
it's a rabbit hole to go down, right? As we're seeing right now, it's dependent on a lot of different factors, right? Because we want to also we value, and native trees are very important to us, and that's obvious within the city and should be prioritized when we can. However, there's instances where we don't want to be necessarily tied to only being able to plant that species. It may not be the most appropriate for the location. We may end up in a situation where diversity, we're suddenly creating a monoculture within an area. And so if we have, say, a pest or a disease that comes in specific for that species, all of a sudden we've lost them all. So my concern is we just don't want to create an environment where we're pigeonholing ourselves into only being able to put a very niche set of species in there. I think to incentivize natives is fantastic, and we should use those as kind of, almost a tiered structure. But there's benefits to other species that are adapted to our environment, and to be able to include those as well, especially as, things are changing, heating up, and hardiness zones are switching, and all of the above. I think we just want to make sure that we're able to not tie ourselves to one thing. I hope that answers your question.
It does.
So something of similar type and size.
I would just say, I appreciate that response, and I would just say, accept a one-to-one replacement of a tree that wasn't intended to come down in the first place. Okay. So with those...
Commissioner Dalton, can I just clarify the commission's intent? Per that language, it also, do you want us to remove the option for them to pay an in lieu fee and only do the one-to-one? Can you show the text on the screen? Because currently they have, for replacement, they have the option in that circumstance to pay a fee.
I think what I'm hearing, or what I think our intention was that I guess we would allow the in lieu fee or the replacement so that they have the most tools available to them to rectify a situation, but that the ratios previously mentioned, and it would just go to one-to-one.
Bottom line is we get a tree. We get a tree somewhere. Hopefully it's a tree on the property, but if it's an in lieu fee and he puts the tree in the city park, well then, and that's okay with the city, right?
Can I just make one comment surrounding the in lieu of fee for dead, dying, and diseased trees? There's instances where the financial value associated with that tree, if it's dead, dying, or diseased, could actually come back as a negative value. So I think in this case, where Mr. Wisniewski pointed out, the in lieu of fee for that may not be the most appropriate, and it's more appropriate to have replacement of that tree versus paying that because it is dead, dying, or diseased. And also those costs with appraisal, depending on the species, it can get larger, but you wouldn't expect that in this sort of. So that's just my insight surrounding the in lieu
Thank you for the
fee.
clarification. I support eliminating the in lieu fee, replacement of one-to-one.
Okay, so will someone make a motion to that effect?
I'd be happy to submit a motion that with the changes that were just discussed, that we move forward and recommend approval.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
And it's recommending the document be moved forward to UFAC and then to City Council with our recommendations noted. Is that
right?
And I'm sorry, I should have done this before, but you want both references to the 30 days after 3 years, and there's 2 sections.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you
7
for
and 8.
clarifying. We talked a lot about different things.
Okay, that passes 5-1. I'd like to take a quick moment just to thank Mark, I'm sorry I don't know your last name, but for being here tonight and participating in the conversation, and your insights were helpful and appreciated. Thank you. I'm still not going to, sorry. And I also recognize the staff. I did think that the ordinance seemed very well written, and as much as I had some issues with it maybe at a high level, I think it was a very solid document, and I appreciate your efforts to date and your efforts tonight to clarify things for us.
And taking it from the meeting, the joint meeting that we had, to this document was quite a feat.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is future agenda items added by the planning commissioners. Are there any future agenda items?
Yes, we should be in a position to go back and revisit our ad hoc committee. Is that where I bring that up here? We had the first conversation about the ad hoc committee regarding the work plan subset of the affordable housing, and like to bring that back up. We should be in a position to discuss it next time with a new document.
Okay.
Is that how that works?
As I understand, that was going to be put on the next time, the March 6th meeting.
Yes. Is that how that works?
I do want to say that I'm going to be at a housing conference on that date, so I will
and
be,
they might be gone too, so should we?
no, I think it's different.
Just you? Okay.
I don't know what date.
Oh,
yours
I'm
are,
happy
but-
to, it's in,
And I'm having surgery that week, so I'm not 100%
Then-
sure if I'll be at that meeting.
then let's push it to the next meeting when we're all going to be here. I think it's important enough that, and people need to review it and have their say, so I don't want to not let anybody talk about it. So we'll just pick a date in the future that works for everybody.
I'd appreciate it. I'd like to hear it and be part of that. So.
Yeah, thank you. Like to have you.
Okay, next item is Planning Commission reports. I think that will come next time or at a future date. Any secretary reports?
I have a couple of items for the commission. Just wanted to let you all know that City Council on February 12th, they upheld the Planning Commission decision and denied the Quail Meadows appeal. And then last night, the San Alejo Residences, which was a design review with 2 unit development and ADUs, that went to City Council as well, and they upheld the Planning Commission decision and denied the appeal for that project as well.
Okay.
Also, before we close, is there an open mic session here? I would like to state my support of Commissioner Dalton. You've worked very hard. I think you're an outstanding individual. You work real hard. You lead us as best you can, given the circumstances that we have. We don't always agree, but you've always been inclusive. You've always been a good listener, and you've always been someone who is passionate about our city. And I want to thank you for that. And I know that over the last few weeks that some things have been said that I support your letter and what you said, and I'm here for you along the way.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. With that, I'm going to adjourn the Planning Commission meeting until our next regular meeting on March 6th. And with that, we're done.